ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the regular council meeting for Monday, December 19th, 2016. Our clerk tonight is Ms. Sheila Gurry, and I wish to note and recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations. We have a lot of business to conduct tonight. We're scheduling a recess at approximately 9 p.m. We do have some work we have to do in camera prior to the end of the evening. Can we start with, first off, late items, please, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. There is several additions to the addendum this evening that staff are recommending council add. Agenda item 5B, Proposed Events Center Public Engagement Feedback, adding the following correspondence. Letter from Ralph Huizinga, Vice President, Acquisitions and Development, Western Canada First Capital Realty, Inc. Letter from Kim Smythe, President and CEO, Greater Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce. Letter from Bernie Dumas, President and CEO, Nanaimo Port Authority. Letter from Ralph Nielsen, PhD, President and Vice Chancellor, Vancouver Island University. And letter from Scott Saywell, Superintendent, Acting CEO, Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. Adding report to agenda item 7A, Event Center Development and Operating Principles. Adding a report to agenda item 7B, Event Center Project, Next Steps and Direction. Agenda item 7B, Event Center Project, Next Steps and Direction, we're adding the following delegations. Number 1, John Dacombe. 2, Wanda Thompson. 3, Catherine Jane Hazel from the South End Community Association. Gary Wycombe on behalf of Protection Island Neighborhood Association. Kim Smythe from Greater Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce. Ian Gartshore. Mark McDonald from the Yes Committee. Henry Traw, General Manager, Coast Bastion Hotel. We're adding agenda item 9A, Safe Injection Site. We're adding agenda item 9B, Advisory Committee Minutes. And agenda item 14B, Mayor McKay's motion regarding citing of medical marijuana dispensaries, and the following delegations: Mr. Matthew O'Donnell, Mr. Richard Scott, Mr. Treva Heshka. And I believe there's going to be an additional speaker added if one of council wants to add Mr. Don Bonner to speak to the event center.
That's
Councillor Pratt, that's
Thank
everything.
you. Council, any others? Councillor Pratt?
Just Mr. Bonner.
Under 14B?
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other council? Seeing none, can we have a motion for the adoption?
Yeah, Your Worship, it's 7B, I believe, that he wants to speak to.
Oh, 7B, not 14A.
That's correct.
7B, okay, great, thank you. Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kipp, thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Before we get into the meeting itself, I just wanted to say thank you everyone for coming out tonight. And we know we've got a very diverse group tonight, and thank you for coming to witness this business meeting of council. I just have to reiterate that this is a business meeting and that you're here to witness. There will be a number of speakers come forward, and we ask that every speaker that comes to the podium feels safe to do so. There's going to be differing opinions tonight, so that means no booing and no clapping. We're just here to receive them. So thank you very much. Everyone needs to feel like they can voice their opinion, particularly if they're signed up as a delegate. Thank you very much. First item is motion for the adoption of the minutes. Item 4. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets.
So move A, B, C, D, and E. Second.
Moved by Councillor Beswick and seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Thank you. Discussion, errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the proposed Event Center Phase 2 in-depth feasibility study. Mr. Gary Green, Director, and Mr. Murray Banyan, Partner of Brisbane Book Banyan Architects. Gentlemen.
Mayor. Pleased to be back again. We went through, in about a 4-week time period, a Phase 1 report, beginning at the end of September and delivered at the end of October. And then this Phase 2 report was requested by Council to be delivered before the end of the year, and we're pleased to be here this evening to go through the findings. As you can see with the picture in front of you on the screen, TV, we have quite a battery of consultants that have joined us, and I will be going through each of those as I go through the presentation this evening. So let us start. Again, to remind people why why we have been looking at this. First is City Council's designation earlier in the year that an event center be one of their strategic plan's top 5 priorities, and also a report on the implications of Nanaimo having an opportunity to secure a WHL team if an event center is developed, and to look at the financial and physical realities of that. The first thing which we touched on over 2 months ago, was the captured market. And you can see in this drawing, and the numbers you're about to see were provided to us by Nanaimo Economic Development. Thank them to them, but we have, and we're going to look at numbers for the red area, which is the primary trade area, really essentially the Nanaimo Regional District. The blue line is the secondary trade area, about just over an hour's drive to downtown Nanaimo, and the yellow area being the tertiary trade area. The one thing you'll see, it is skewed to the north because we picked approximately halfway between Nanaimo and Victoria, or just north of Malahat, just south of Duncan, as the dividing line between Victoria and Nanaimo, which has its own facility, and to a certain extent people would more naturally south of those lines go to Victoria to watch events. People north of those lines and to the north in Vancouver Island would go to Nanaimo if a facility were to be built. From the census data in 2015, the regional district has 163,000. When the building would be built in 2019 using similar growth rates, we're looking at 173,000 people. An additional 140,000 in the secondary trade area within a 70-minute travel time. And the tertiary is an additional 70,000 people within a 110-minute drive. Those numbers are 2015, by the way, not the second 2 numbers, not escalated to 2019. The building program. Understanding those demographics, and as well understanding the two of the primary uses, the WHL team. We'd recommend a capacity of 5,700. That as well would allow Nanaimo to be in a position to attract against competing cities such events as the Memorial Cup or major curling competitions, etc. And then the second group of shows, the touring shows. The base facility was 7,100, and we've also looked at options of taking it just over 8,000 to be able to maximize the number of signature events that would come to Nanaimo. The other key criteria of just being a first-class experience, whatever type of event you're coming to, have a wide cross-section of seating and hospitality products for all different types of people in the community. Obviously, an efficient operation. Operational costs are a major long-term factor, sustainability factor in these, and as well attractive to moving in and out shows that would come, we call them touring shows. And as well that, as we've certainly met with a lot of people in Nanaimo, the ability for future growth to including additional activities that could occur in the building. That seemed to be a very common theme. We also had 2 options. One, I just mentioned about taking the concert capacity up. It is becoming apparent as we see it across the country that the facilities that have and are approaching 8,000 in the round maximum for concerts or touring shows are attracting bigger events, and ones that don't aren't. As well, in that option, We were looking in option A at additional meeting rooms, recreational facilities, community initiatives to really make the building a 365-day-a-year recreational community center. In both those, in these components of the option, hockey capacity would stay at 5,700. Option B is another add-on option of potentially putting additional dollars into making this more of an extraordinary piece of architecture. And we're not saying what that architecture should be today. That would be a very inclusive process if this council made the decision to proceed with the project. But that this could become a major tourist destination, we believe, to get people to come to downtown Nanaimo or to Nanaimo, period, as they're traveling by or coming to Vancouver Island. One idea that we had presented to us by a good number of people was because it had been, both sites were looking at a coast Salish village site of potentially building upon that in a modern way from an architectural point of view, which we'll show in a second. This option would also include additional environmental initiatives to make this an environmental showcase in the community and on Vancouver Island. On the point of architecture, we did do, and it was pointed out to me as we had different meetings with the local First Nations community, that we maybe had interpreted a little incorrectly with some ideas in the first presentation of we were a little too far north on the architectural imagery, and we did more research on the Coast Salish, which is very distinctive and has a rich history in this area of North America. So the one design that we had looked at was a very simple longhouse design, modern materials on the exterior, glass, etc. And it could be done in many different ways. Again, I emphasize this is not meant to be an architectural presentation. We had to, on the site analysis, which you'll see in a few minutes, put not just a square box on the site, we had to do some architectural to give people a feeling for the size of the building. Several people that I've met in the different meetings said, wow, it seems too big. The wall of the building on the sides, not the peak, but the wall and the two buildings on the side, is about 4 stories in commercial building height. So very similar to what you see in many buildings in downtown Nanaimo today. And if you want to look at it actually on the south side, if you're leaving the building on the south side of the conference center tonight, facing the casino, it's very similar to that facade in height, actually a bit less than that. That was another concept as well, or variation. Some of the key things with regard to design that was very clear from both our experience that a design that gave us more of concert seating, tourist show, family show seating that would attract more events, but maintaining the permanent hockey capacity at 5,700. We believe we've been able to do that. It was a 3-level step bowl design that we have used, and I'll show you some pictures that of probably events you have seen, but one that gives you very much on top of the action, no matter what type of event you're seeing. A compressed building footprint, because the 2 main sites that have been looked at downtown do not have all the land in the world, and a compressed building footprint as well, we will believe will be quite economical to develop. And as well, a proven design template that maximizes value for the budget, which is essentially what I was just talking about. This is one concert that many of you might have watched. It was in our building in Kingston, Ontario, a building with 5,700 hockey seats, by the way. It was for the Tragically Hip several months ago. And I think for those who watched on television, it was very much, you had no feeling that you were in a smaller building compared to actually Air Canada Centre or Rogers Centre in Vancouver. It was a very professional performance. So the buildings actually are very much like Rogers Centre in Vancouver, only smaller, but can accommodate generally the same type of events throughout. The ground floor would be a main concourse that would be at street level. It would have food courts, it would have retail, etc., that would open to the street. The major objective in these buildings these days is to keep them active 365 days a year. That people feel comfortable coming in, that they're actually used as community centers 365 days when there isn't an event going on, when obviously there's ticket control and that type of thing. This would be just a quick rendition of what a public concourse looks like in a modern event center. And again, this would be at street level on either of the two sites we've looked at. The second level is at the back of the lower bowl, the main bowl of seating, and is open to the bowl. So it could have different types of seating, different types of hospitality areas, while the third area is private suites and a major restaurant bar that you can see in the right of the screen in the middle, with, in both sites, spectacular views to the east over the harbor. And this is one that's well rendering on the Howard Johnson site with that condo you can see on the right-hand side that exists today. And this is right in the Arena Bowl looking out. And this is another rendering over, it isn't all that different looking at the Barrier Islands out there, looking out from the One Port Drive site, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, we retained BTY, a very well-known company, and I'd like Mark Ravel to come up and just go over, he's done quite a complete cost analysis in the reports that you've received, and to review that with you. Mark?
Thank you very much for having us here. BTY Group has been around for roughly 40 years now. We've done projects around North America. We've been involved in setting up the budget for the Vancouver Whistler Olympics, Calgary Olympics. We've done many arenas across Canada. St. Catharines Arena, our spectator facility, is roughly about the same size, 5,700 seats. We also did the Gatineau Arena in Quebec, again, roughly the same size, about 5,700. So we've done some large arenas, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Niagara Falls, Fort Pad. So we're quite well versed in arenas. We have a huge database of material we utilize to develop budgets for projects like this. So it is a method of establishing cost planning and cost control. So the first step we're doing now is developing a realistic budget to move forward with. So the estimate is actually based on the drawings you saw today. What's not defined is the exact materials, but we set up a budget based on the elements of the project. So the structure, the exterior, interior partitions, doors, everything is measured and priced in detail. What isn't defined yet is the actual material, but for the exterior, based on our experience, most exterior cladding runs roughly around $600 per square meter for this type of project. So once the design develops, there's different options for material selections for the process. So it is a process. It's the beginning of establishing a realistic budget to go forward with. Once the estimate is complete, we do benchmark it against the other project we worked upon, taking into account the location, economic market conditions, and escalation to the midpoint of construction. So that's the essence of setting up a budget, is cost planning. The second part, which is probably the most critical one, is cost control. So during the design process, we work with the design team to make sure their design always meets the budget. So we do a series of estimates, 4 or 5 estimates through the design process to benchmark that the design always meets the budget. Historically, we're roughly around 3 to 4% for the low tender. We typically be around the second tender, which is kind of the more realistic quote from the project. And that's how we established the budget for this project of $68 million for option 1. Sure. So the development costs are based on historical data, material and labor. We use quite a sophisticated estimating package called Timberline, which breaks things down to material and labor. So everything is monitored for the project and for the location of the project, whether it's downtown or suburbs, whether it's Toronto or Nanaimo. It also includes things like the general contractors, contingencies, and fees. So this is the price you get when it goes out to the market. We also set up a realistic contingencies at this stage. So right now we're carrying about 10% design contingency, which is about $5 million. So during the design process, that design contingency gets down to 0 by the time you go to tender. So it is some buffer in there to allow for design changes, unknown conditions during the course of the design process. What we're talking about now is strictly the hard cost or the construction cost. On top of that, there's your soft costs, which includes things like professional fees, disbursements, things like the visual boards, scoreboards, loose furniture and equipment, testing and inspection. Typically, the split between hard cost and soft cost is 80% construction, 20% soft cost. And again, that's how this project was based upon. What it does exclude is things like land. For this project, in excess of 100 parking stalls. Again, we talked about the legal fees, accounting, administration cost. Excludes building permits, service cost, and financing. The cost for additional service and roads outside the footprint of the building. The sewer line relocation for both sites, and demolition if that's applicable for this project. So the development cost is hard and soft is $69.8 million, with additional $9.6 million for option A, which is the enlarged building, and option B, which is the enhanced entrance of $7.2 million. So that brings the total development cost to roughly $86.6 million. And again, that includes 20% soft cost of $14.4 million. And these costs are escalated to midpoint of construction, which we anticipate to be May 2018. And that's my speech. Thank you.
Thank you. After capital cost, the next major thing is, of course, the operation of the building and what are the results from the anticipated financial results. And the person that I've known for many years, one of the true experts in the business in North America, Canada, and the United States, is Rich Oriolo of Stafford Sports, who I'd like to now introduce. Rich?
Thank you for having me here. The first slide, I just want to show you some of our background in working in the industry of hockey. I used to run marketing for the Flyers many years ago, but we have negotiated agreements with a number of these, both professional sports teams and minor league teams. We're actually at one more to add to that list. We're currently negotiating a USHL agreement for a 5,700-seat building in Iowa. Moving on, this is some of the projects, representative list of buildings that we have worked on, variety of areas, mostly business planning. Some we've seen the development of these arenas all the way through. There are a number of these in the 5,000 to 10,000 seat range that we've worked on as well. And then what I'd like to do is just highlight for the audience and for council some of the conclusions of our independent analysis that was done. First, I would say that it's really based on benchmarking about 10 facilities of similar size across both Western Canada and United States. Secondly, it's based on our experience in doing these financial plans. And then third, it's really talking to promoters and presenters of touring shows. And just in terms of the conclusions, we see a small subsidy for operation in the first 2 years of operation. That will change starting in year 3 and moving forward, where we see the building generating an operating profit. Not enough to service debt. Frankly, all of the buildings that do not have professional sports franchises really aren't able to service debt with operating revenues. We see that continuing on through a 10-year period. We are projecting 114 events in year 1, 127 in year 2, 128 in year 3. Really modest growth in terms of the event calendar. Of those 114 or so events, about 39 are attributed to hockey. The financial analysis, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't really include debt service. That's a separate analysis, or things like property insurance. But it does include the typical revenue streams that you see in buildings of this size, as well as in buildings that are host professional teams, and that's naming rights, premium seating, event rent, food and beverage, catering, concessions, and merchandising. We've included a amount in there for annual repairs and replacement. It's been our experience that if you don't budget for this, there's a tendency to kind of leave repairs and replacement till a later date, which is problematic. These facilities constantly need to be upgraded, and we really see that starting about year 5. So it'll at least give you the opportunity to put away money to address that down the road. We do have a facility fee in there that's dedicated to operational expenses. And then in terms of how it is staffed, the underlying assumption here is that there is an experienced private management company who comes in and operates this building for a number of reasons. The industry has really moved to that model, both in major markets and in secondary markets. There are experienced companies who do this. They know how to operate. They know how to operate with an anchor tenant like the WHL. And frankly, they have the ability to bring in events because they are able to leverage all the buildings that they have with touring shows and concert promoters. So that experienced management company would bring in 20 full-time people. They would have another 175 people as a part-time labor force, and probably close to a pool of 300 people who would be available to work on a part-time basis. I would say this in conclusion, in terms of the event mix, the mix that we envision is very typical of what happens in facilities of this size and in the industry in general. In addition to the anchor tenant, the WHL franchise, we see touring family shows like Disney on Ice, Sesame Street, Harlem Globetrotters, Cirque du Soleil, who would all play this facility. There'll be touring ice shows that will come in, motorsports, professional wrestling, the concert industry, particularly in Western Canada. The trend that we're seeing is country concerts being very popular, religious Christian shows being popular, ethnic concerts, and of course pop concerts as well. We see regional amateur tournaments for multiple sports like lacrosse, basketball, hockey. There will be ice rentals in this building. There'll be leagues, adult and youth leagues. There'll be public skating as well. And finally, I think to Murray's point, we really see the opportunity here for recreational use and community use. Not only things like graduations and meetings, but the opportunity for folks to use the concourse during inclement weather. Murray, in his initial design, BBB, has built in some flex spaces in the building. So if people wanted to hold aerobic classes, they could do it in the facility. It's really a complementary way of keeping this building active and remembering that it is for the community. One thing that we did not project that I just want to touch on, we really see this as a great opportunity to collaborate with the conference center and the Port Theater to attract conventions and meetings. We see that across the country now where arenas and convention centers are working together so that breakout meetings happen in a conference center and plenary sessions happen in the arena. And Murray, I think we're done.
Thank you. So out of both the construction capital cost and the operations, one can start to look at economic community impacts. And for that, we have hired MNP, one of Canada's most respected companies, cross-Canada companies. And I'd like to call up Ed Mansfield, please.
I'm a little shorter than the last speaker here. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to have the chance to talk to you about some of the estimates that we've prepared involving the economic impacts of this proposed facility. By way of introduction, MMP is an accounting consulting firm. Many of you might be familiar with our office here in Nanaimo. We have about 19 offices in British Columbia, about 800 people, and about 3,000 people across Canada. I lead the economics and research practice. We're based in Vancouver, but we do economic impact studies right across the country and even in some cases down into the United States. We've worked extensively in the area of tourism, hospitality, and we've had the pleasure of working with many municipalities across Canada. So what we've prepared is a full report that you can see in the submission, but here's just a few highlights. As a friend of mine would say, I can speak about economics until the last person falls asleep, but in the interests of getting through the rest of the presentation, thought just a few highlights might suffice here. The first are the economic impacts in terms of employment, tax revenues, GDP, all these good economic measures that one can expect from the actual construction. So depending on whether the base project or the recommended facility goes ahead, the total employment that would be realized in British Columbia is between 700 and about 859 full-time equivalent positions. That's for the construction. Based on what we understand from some of the projections about the use of local labor and the use of local suppliers, we would estimate that about 2/3 of that would be realized here in the Nanaimo area. The remaining 1/3 would be realized elsewhere in British Columbia. So it's not an inconsequential project, obviously creating quite a lot of employment. Of course, whenever you build something, you employ people. So what's also interesting is to see what would happen on an ongoing basis from the operations of the event center. So what we have here on this very easy to understand table is a summary of the economic impacts that would be likely to occur on an ongoing basis from the operation of the center. Also included in here is the economic impacts that would be generated through the operation of a WHL team and also spending by visiting teams that have come to play here in the event center. So again, these are annual impacts, and what we estimate is that approximately 107 full-time equivalent positions would be created on an ongoing basis. Again, it's a substantial number of people that are required to run the event center and to operate the team. Finally, some points about visitors. Obviously, the projection of number of visitors that would come and stay overnight depends on several key factors. It depends on how effective the marketing campaigns are that are undertaken by the event center and the associated groups. It depends, of course, on the number of events and type of events and an ability to attract visitors. So what we have prepared is economic impacts per 1,000 visitors. So these are for every 1,000 visitors that could be attracted and stay overnight. And then also we've looked at what would the experience have been from other event centers such as in Kelowna. And if one looks at some of these other experiences, they find that approximately 9 to 10% of people attending events at some of these other event centers stay overnight. If one applies that percentage to the projected attendance at the event center, you come out with total economic impacts from overnight visitors of about between 40 and 50 full-time equivalent jobs created from overnight visitors. Potential, of course, is to increase that quite substantially, and I would say these are a little on the conservative side, as accounting firms tend to be. We tend to like to be a little bit on the conservative side if there's a place to err. We haven't included some of the other impacts. It can be argued that by having such an event center, you keep dollars within your community that might have gone elsewhere. People that might have gone to see an event in Victoria or to Vancouver, they might stay at home and keep their money at home. We haven't included any of that spending by local residents in these assumptions. These are just from out-of-town visitors. Finally, the other thing that we haven't included in our report, again, because we do try to be on the conservative side, we haven't included any of the less tangible benefits that might accrue, such as public relations, promotion of Nanaimo as a city. Certainly when we've worked in other places, we have seen that having such an event center, especially with an accompanying team in a major sports league, does help to promote the city as a place that is attractive, a place where people want to come, a place where people want to live and work, but we haven't quantified or included any of those benefits in these numbers. Again, the full analysis is contained in the report, and would encourage anyone that has additional questions on the economic analysis to look in the report. Thank you.
One interesting point to what Ed just said was some time ago, before we were justifying to government in Alberta about renovating the Calgary Saddle Dome, and we did quite an extensive search of media outside of Alberta. And it turned out that the team that played there, events that played in the building, and the building accounted for 60% of the time that Calgary was ever mentioned in media outside of Alberta. So it's amazing how these buildings seem to generate PR and media. Site evaluations. You recall when we met 2 months ago that we recommended and decided to proceed forward with 2 sites downtown. One, the Howard Johnson site, often we short formed it to HJS, and the One Port Drive site, or One PDS. And we're going to review those now. First of all, the Howard Johnson site. We have now, I guess, for 3 months been working with those owners on several aspects, and the aspect I've been looking at in this regard was a site plan that could optimize the value of the site for the event center, and as at that time they stated their objectives to complete other development on the site, particularly residential and hotel. And this was the site plan that was settled on, both in dealing with the city on the event center portion and with the Howard Johnson people. And it really placed the event center right at the intersection of Terminal and Comox, the main entry plaza, with the service area on the west end of the event center. The overall land, I should say, circled by the red, is 8 acres. I point out, and this is going to come up a few times, it is quite a steep slope, going from about 20 meters in height, 2/3 of the way up Comox Road, down to an elevation around 3-4 meters on Millstone, adjacent to Millstone River. The other challenge, so that is one challenge we're dealing with. The second one is just access to the site, and because of the bridge on Terminal, it seems that Comox is the only way to get, the main way to get in, opposed to Mill Street, which has limitations being a residential street. But it would be the main entry, giving access to the service access to the event center and to the hotel and residential. You can see the provincial government lands that are circled on Comox in the center of the site. They are still owned. They're looking, they have indicated potentially selling these in the spring, but it is, I think, certainly believed by the owner of the site and by us, it would be a very difficult site to develop on without securing those lands, as long as the private developer wanted to develop these other aspects. Most recently, there have been other thoughts by the owner with regard to how this site plan would be done and other options developed, but this was the only one that reached some level of finalization. I'll talk to that a little bit more in my assessment in a second. The existing site is on the upper left, and the building in the same photomontaged in. Again, I emphasize it's not architect, but it gives you a feeling of the scale of the building. The hotel is in the foreground between the river, or shall we say between Terminal and the event center itself. Then One Port Drive. Maybe go to the site plan. It's to the southeast of Front Street and is really between the C-Span Railroad that runs to its immediate southeast as well from the port terminal. The lands that have now been secured by the city are circled in red. The event center portion that we'd be looking at, the event plaza, the event center, and the exterior service area is about 3 acres. The other 2 development sites out by the harbor and on to the south, labeled there, the remaining site, would be developed in any way the city saw fit that would be the highest and best use. The good news about it, as opposed to the Howard Johnson, is the flat site, which is a good thing when you're dealing with very large footprints where essentially the bottom floor is flat, that if they become very angular or gradient, it becomes difficult, as I said. And this is a visualization as well, existing upper left, again giving a feel of scale of the building, looking towards the northwest. So some common positives about both sites. They're both large enough, they're both prominent gateway sites, very, very visible in the downtown. They are both in downtown, which certainly the majority of these buildings have been built in downtown in the last 10, 15, 20 years, both in Canada and the United States, and it offers higher levels of accessibility, economic benefits, and exposure, which as well helps the business plan from sponsorship point of view. Around both, and we'll get into traffic in a few minutes, is significant available existing parking, and when the building holds events, has significant existing traffic capacity on the roads. One good thing from all historical look, and we had some significant work done by our consultants, Tetra Tech in this regard, there do not appear to be any coal workings below the 2 building footprints, which I think most people in this room know can lead to quite significant additional costs. They also have both good geology below, room for ancillary development, which is one of the benefits of these type of buildings. They spur ancillary developments. We would anticipate a new hotel definitely out of this. They're both on First Nations village sites, so I think there's a potential there to celebrate that and make that something special. And they obviously will accelerate waterfront rehabilitation and trail extensions either to the south or along the Millstone River. They really have 3 common challenges. One is the village sites of just making certain everyone feels comfortable with that and moving ahead, and that's really related a lot to the archaeological issues on both sites that have to be dealt with. And both have some underground services on them that would have to be relocated or dealt with below the building as it would be built. Howard Johnson's specific positives, which I mentioned 2 months ago about being adjacent to Mafio Sutton Park, which is obviously a major outdoor event center, and I think that's a positive in the summertime for it to support those events. It is zoned for a multi-use spectator arena, big point, and the owners propose to move with private sector development immediately and concurrently if the event center is built. As well, I think it's been planned by traffic people to widen Comox Road, that this widening would not impact the site's viability. The challenges, I talked about the gradient, the public-private sector agreements as we've seen them for these type of buildings over the last 30 years take time, they're difficult, and we are under a short time fuse, as everyone knows. It's also immediately adjacent to residential, and these buildings, which I think may be of some concern to those people, particularly in the evenings with people leaving the building, or particularly with touring trucks of the 30, 35 times a year when they were to leave. Further environmental studies are required. We have quite a bit of historical, but it is not complete. So there is a risk factor there, and obviously the securing of the provincial government lands will take time. The Port Drive site, positives, city-owned, good chunk of environmental approvals in place. It's just like The other one's to the anchor to the north. It would be a great anchor to the south end of the downtown waterfront trail. Close proximity to convention center, as Rich stated, and these two types of buildings have proven to be very successful in working together and support each other. And I think that is a real benefit as well with the Port Theatre to support an emerging entertainment, arts, and cultural district. As well, besides just the immediate development, I think everyone would envision additional development occurring on the port lands to the south, and this would be an ideal catalyst for that. It supports, as we read it, the Downtown Waterfront Initiative's guiding principles. The limited train movements do not cause a problem because they are so limited, as we are told both now and in the future. And we have a design that will deal with not having to remove large amounts of fill, which I think, because there are some environmental issues, but as long as it's capped, as we are told by the environmental engineers, will not be a problem. The two issues, it still needs to go through rezoning, and there are still issues with regard to Front Street design that may impact just how the building is positioned on the site. In the end, as we looked at it, we preferred, from the main issue, the main issues why we preferred the One Port Drive site were as follows. The city ownership versus the long negotiations on the Howard Johnson site. The city will incur additional costs because you've already purchased the One Port Drive site, if you now went out and purchased another piece of land. The One Port Drive potentially could have a lot bigger impacts to the opening up of the downtown to the south. Less disruption to local residents. Residences are further from the building, and the trucks aren't driving up a 10% gradient to get off the site, as they would be at Howard Johnson. The steep grades give us real concern, as I mentioned, about construction costs. Adjacency to the convention center, I mentioned, and I think there seems to be strong emerging consensus of a new bus station hub of some type being done, and that would probably occur in South Downtown, which would be truly improve access and for this building. Moving on to an issue that is of interest to everyone, parking, traffic, and transit. We retained Bunt and Associates, and I'd like to introduce Peter Joyce at this point. Peter?
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. Peter Joyce, President of Bunt & Associates. Just a little bit to begin with about our company. We were established in 1993. We are specialists in transportation planning and engineering. We have offices in Vancouver, Victoria, Calgary, and Edmonton, about 60 staff overall, and been involved with a number of projects across Western Canada, including many here in Nanaimo, specifically related to our involvement, and we were specifically retained to consider the One Port Drive site, the transportation aspects of that project. We look upon our experience with some very significant large event venues, Rogers Place in Edmonton, Rogers Arena in Vancouver. We have been involved with the Downtown Vancouver Entertainment District Transportation Study, considering traffic, parking, transit, pedestrian, cyclist activity. We're involved with the preparation of the strategic plans for the 2010 Olympic Games in Vancouver, and we've been involved with event traffic management for PGA golf events in the Vancouver area. So again, just very briefly, as it relates to the One Port Drive site, we have been on the ground since we've been retained. We, both for a weekday condition and for a weekend condition, we examined both parking and traffic conditions within a 10-minute walking distance of the One Port Drive site, both on December 1st, a Friday, and December 2nd, which was a Saturday. And I would also add on the Saturday that there was an event on at the Port Theatre. The Vancouver Island Symphony was performing to a fairly full house. as part of that analysis, what we wanted to understand was the actual available parking, not the total parking that's in the area, but the available parking once demand is accounted for. And what we determined is that there's up to 1,450 parking spaces available in the evening period. So this is in the pre-event period for larger attendance events that would happen at the event center, that within a 10-minute walk or 800 meters. We further determined that for major events at the event center, so these are events that would be of 5,000 attendees and up, that the demand is upwards of 1,500 parking spaces off-site. There are planned to be 100 spaces on the site, so we'd have 1,500 spaces off the site. And for the major event condition with roughly 5,000 patrons, most of that parking, nearly all of it, would be accommodated within parking within the 10-minute walk of the facility. I would add that our parking analysis does not include parking that is available at the adjacent Port Place Shopping Center. We are considering downtown parkades, and we're considering street parking within that 10-minute walk, but not parking on the Port Place Shopping Center site. What we determined is that for larger events, so for that handful of events every year that are of 6,400 patrons and up, that very likely that a bus shuttle service would be required to remote parking areas, and that would all be covered as part of a event-specific transportation management plan. On the traffic side, the larger events at the event center would be typically occurring into the evening period, with either a 7 o'clock or a 7:30 start, sometimes even later. Very importantly, during that pre-event period, so the time leading up to 7 o'clock, 7:30, traffic on the downtown streets is 40 to 60% less than it was just a few hours before during the mid-afternoon weekday peak. And for the post-event period, so when the event is letting out, traffic is 75% less than it was during the busiest time of the day. So what that suggests is that there is actually a significant amount of surplus capacity in the downtown street system to accommodate the pre-event and the post-event traffic loads. The other thing that's important to recognize is that because the parking distribution across the downtown is actually quite distributed, that the traffic loads are also quite distributed. So rather than having a central parking facility where all of that traffic would be concentrated, and you would feel more of that pre-event and in particular the post-event traffic circumstance, with a distributed parking base, the traffic across the downtown would be distributed as well. And the last point, just to pick up on what Murray was describing, a future transit hub in the south portion of the downtown will certainly improve the access to the facility, and by the same token, the venue-generated transit activity will serve to boost awareness of these transit connections to the downtown. So there's a kind of a knock-on benefit that comes from having a transit facility close to a major venue like this. I believe that's all I've got right now. Thank you.
I should state then as well that we've had a very good working relationship with the Howard Johnson site. They've been extremely cooperative. They retained Watt Group and did their own transportation. They decided not to be here this evening or be available, but having read that report in a fair bit of detail, the findings are not all that different. It was a totally independent report. It's in the materials you received. But the findings are not that different from what Peter just outlined, except where it's obviously site-specific for such issues as bus hubs and things like that. They also, I think I alluded to before, retained WSP to do an update on soil and geology and environmental, primarily from past reports, but it was still an excellent report, and they cooperated in all ways possible with us in the preparation of this report. So, Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you very much for your time, and that's the end of our report.
Thank you. Council's had some time with the consultant, so a lot of questions have already been answered. Are there any questions before we move receipt of the delegation? Seeing none,
Yes, sir, I have a question.
Councilor Bestwick.
Thank you. Much appreciate the information that's been presented and provided in the last several months. A question that I have for you, Mr. Benyon, should this project not proceed, and in your professional wisdom, forecasting, can you help me better understand what this project, as it sits today, if we were to build it on either site, what it may cost in 10 years from now?
Certainly a normal thing we look at, but it's our cost, so if you don't mind me, just bring up Mark again.
We did a quick analysis. If it's extended by about 10 years, you're probably talking about 117 million.
Excuse me?
117 million,
117
to 120 million in 10-year period. And that's assuming a 2 to 3% escalation rate per year, which we've seen the last few years in BC.
Thank you. And follow up to that, if I may. Had we built this 10 years ago, can you tell me, going backwards, what it may have cost?
It would be about 65 million to 68 million 10 years ago.
10 years ago? Thank you. That's all I have. Thanks.
Councilor Pratt.
I'm just wondering, one of the comments that was made was, I think it was considered a plus, was that it is close to the Port Theatre. And it made me think about all of the facilities around there, and you were talking about keeping the facility full, keeping it active on a daily basis, or often at least. What is the experience that you might know of in terms of the impact of other facilities around an event center like this, such as the Port Theatre, such as other venues that provide rooms for rent and activities for the community?
Right. Very good question. Well, certainly, maybe looking at this from what has been happening, certainly in North America, is that event districts and event areas have become the thing to do. And people designating areas and trying to promote a group of theaters in there. And, well, you see it in Toronto on the west end of downtown, and to the south, Air Canada Centre, the Rogers Centre, and all the theaters are there, and nightclubs and restaurants and that type of thing. And that has become a norm in many cities, from medium size to large size. I think that, so that's one way to look at, I think, the question you're asking. Another way to look at it is that we've seen these buildings be built, event centers, out in a greenfield site. And 10 years later, nothing has happened because on their own, they do not support a hotel or very much because people are coming every third day or every 2.5 times a week on average. But if they are supporting other businesses, if they are placed near other businesses, such as downtown, that they do make those restaurants, bars, and retail establishments, and even services, fitness clubs, and things like that, much more viable. They bring another level of business to them. And so we've normally seen in those circumstances where another hotel normally has been built. And it's not uncommon to see that. We've even seen condominiums and residential. There's a whole feeling that there aren't people that want to live in a quiet enclave everywhere. There are people that want to live where there's fun things to do in the evenings or every 2 or 3 or 4 days. So that's certainly been the experience in downtown London and Kingston, and I could go on with the list of cities where they have been true economic regenerators for the businesses in the area.
Thank you.
Councilor Yocum.
Thank you. Maureen, do you mind if we call up the gentleman from MNP? I have some questions around the money around the construction of the event center, and then also the economic benefit spin-off per se. I don't know the right language, but the benefits of potential dollars we made and spent in Nanaimo made off the event, but also, like you just touched on, the restaurants and whatnot. I never got a chance to ask the gentleman when he was up there.
Well, maybe he should come back, Ed. He's definitely.
If we go to that slide, if we may, because
Start.
don't totally get all your lingo all the time, so if we can go through it and. So I'm really interested, if I may, around the construction, the time frame of, like you said something about equivalent to 800 full-time jobs during construction and whatnot. So if we could go through that for myself, if you don't mind, please.
No, of course. What we do is we take the projected spending and we work with some of the other consultants here to understand the breakdown of how would the money be spent in terms of what proportion would be spent on labor, what proportion on equipment, what proportion on materials, et cetera, et cetera. And so then we look at the economic multipliers that are produced by agencies. In this case, it's by Statistics Canada and by BC Stats that give us an indication of how many jobs and GDP and taxes are generated when a certain amount of money is spent in each of these categories, be it on equipment, be it on materials, be it on labor, et cetera. So it's quite a detailed analysis. And then what we do is we look at that breakdown of spending. We calculate how much, in the case, for example, of employment, how many jobs will be created in each of the industries that support that particular aspect of construction, and then add them all up.
So if I may jump in.
Yes.
Say the first line there where it says direct output, GDP, employment, federal tax, provincial tax, municipal tax. If you may quickly just give her, I'm feeling really simple right now, so if you can.
No, not at all. Sorry.
No,
Sometimes,
right.
Of course, when you're dealing with economic concepts, we're guilty of using jargon that sounds good at the meeting of the Canadian Economic Society, but might not be familiar to everyone. So the direct jobs are the jobs that would be created on site, actually in the actual construction period. Indirect jobs are jobs that are created through suppliers, people that produce goods and services that are used in the construction. So if I'm selling a lumber to the people that are constructing it, then the jobs that are created in my business to sell lumber, those are indirect jobs.
So that 120 million, you stated 2/3 would most likely be local, like within the region, or say Vancouver Island.
Yes, that's correct. Or well, actually, probably within the greater Nanaimo area.
Yes. And the next one, can you go through that for myself, please? The GDP.
Yes, GDP and output are two measures of economic activity. Output is sort of the total amount of money that gets spent and recirculated in the construction. It is a measure of total activity. So if I spend money and I purchase it from, say I'm purchasing now lumber to be built, the amount of money that gets spent on lumber gets included in output, and then the amount of money that was spent by the lumber company to purchase its raw materials also get included in output. So output is a very broad measure, and it shows you how much money is circulated through the economy, through the actual development of the project, and then through the spending of suppliers. GDP is gross domestic product. And it is a better measure of total economic activity than output because there's no double counting. It only looks at the incremental added value at each stage in the process. So GDP is sort of a pure, true added economic activity to the economy that would be realized. Whereas output, there's some double counting because again, it incorporates the spending not only on the initial project, but also the spending by suppliers downstream.
And my last one would be, thank you, Council, for your patience. The municipal tax, which would be a question for many of the people watching or in the audience or the citizens in the city. So can you walk through, I see 0.86. What does that line defer to? Total 0.86 on the far right.
Yes.
I totally went down the end, sorry.
Yes, so sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, so of course, some of the other factors that come out of the analysis is the amount of tax that might be generated for different levels of government.
Oh, generate, yeah.
So federal tax is pretty straightforward. That includes GST, it includes income tax, it includes corporate taxes, it includes a variety of taxes that get associated with the development. Same thing with provincial tax. It would include a variety of provincial taxes, income tax, et cetera, et cetera. Municipal tax, again, is the taxes that's generated for the local municipality. And those arise through, for example, businesses that have business involved with the construction, in this case the construction of the facility, would themselves have to pay certain property taxes or licenses or fees or things like that. So municipal tax usually arises from the taxes generated from businesses that are involved with the actual production. Here we've said there's no direct municipal tax. Again, it's a conservative assumption, and we've assumed that because we've assumed that the ownership of the facility would be the municipality itself rather than a private company or a private-public partnership.
One last one, if I may. Thank you. That's it on this. It's key for my understanding, though. Table B, GDP, 72 million. The Table B chart is economic impacts of recommended facility. Is that after the project?
No, the one is, I believe it depends on, there's the two options. Do you want to speak to that?
The base project, the upper thing was the $69 million
Oh, I got it. Okay.
project,
Got
and
it.
the other one is the $86 million with the options added.
Okay, thank you. Just needed my clarity. Thanks.
So the impacts are just proportionally higher with a larger spend.
Yeah. More. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Hong.
Thank you. If you'd like to stay, I actually wanted to ask some more about taxes. And with regards to these developments, in an area where we are number 1 Port Drive, it's not the most desirable in the form of BC assessment. I know you're not BC assessment, but when you put buildings on this, does that give you the spin-offs of the other properties in that area to increase? Like I said, Port Place Mall, for example, went from $1.3 million a year in property taxes to $1.5 million last year. And I'm sure it's going to go up again this year. So based on that, do the properties increase in value?
Generally speaking, that's the experience, yes. A good example would be in Richmond with the establishment of the Richmond Oval there and the value of the properties in the surrounding area that were realized because of the establishment of the facility and all the redevelopment that has occurred in that area.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no further questions. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Thorpe, seconded by Councillor Kipp. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next item is on the same subject matter, public engagement feedback. Mr. Chris Henderson, strategist of Calder Bateman. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship and Mayor, excuse me, members of council. Just give me just 1 second, and I'll set up my presentation. My name is Chris Henderson. I'm a strategist with Calder Bateman Communications. A little bit about us. We're a full-service marketing and advertising and public engagement agency with about 26 years of public engagement and stakeholder engagement experience. Our most notable recent projects that relate most closely to this are Edmonton's poverty reduction stakeholder engagement strategy, at the City of Edmonton's Recreation Facility Master Plan renewal, which we're doing currently. Earlier this year, we advised Edmonton Northlands on outreach efforts on their major site improvements, which included a proposed 5,000 seat venue. And of course, we worked very closely with the City of Edmonton to develop or to design and facilitate the Edmonton Downtown Arena public consultations. Our role in this project is we worked very closely with the city of Nanaimo staff on what public consultation methods should be used to help refine the questions for each public consultation method. We collected all of the raw input from each of the input streams. We sorted and analyzed all of that input to reflect it faithfully back to this council, and we've produced a What We Heard report that you have directly in front of you. I think it would be important for me at this point to explain what we're not here to do. We're not here to judge or comment on the viability of the event center itself. We're a group of communicators, marketers, advertisers, and facilitators. We're not planners, engineers, or promoters. Our scope here is very limited to listening to participants and letting you know what we believe they're saying. We're also not here to validate one perspective or the other. Our report and presentation, if our report or presentation appears to have emphasis, that's a function of the feedback that we've received from the participants. We've done our best to remove any biases on our part and be as impartial as possible, and we've kept our team on this quite small to ensure that we're not bringing in any biases from other projects. So I want to go through our engagement approach. We've based this engagement approach in the context of this specific community, what we understand the public conversation in Nanaimo has been so far, but we've also applied some learnings from two specific pieces of work that we've done quite recently. The first is the Alberta government's 2015 review of its energy resource royalty framework, and of course the public consultations conducted for the City of Edmonton on the issues surrounding the then proposed downtown arena, which is now fully built. Both of these files were important public conversations that required a very careful public approach. These are very high-profile types of projects. The public doesn't approach them the same way. In our experience, the public doesn't approach them the same way that they approach libraries and even some recreation centers. So we had a basic structure that sought to create as many public opportunities as possible for people to provide input. We wanted people to be able to provide input from the comfort of their own home anonymously if they wanted, through a survey or through a social media stream. But we also wanted them to be able to have a face-to-face conversation with other people in the community or a city staff member. Or quite frankly, if they wanted to do both, we wanted to make sure that they were able to do both. Given this stage in the public conversation, we made sure to capture heavily qualitative sentiment or methods to capture qualitative sentiment more than we did quantitative sentiment. We did, however, take a separate quantitative measurement to provide a baseline to compare with the findings that we found in the qualitative measures, as well as provide a comparator for any future public consultation. Eventually, as public consultations move forward, they tend to be more quantitative, particularly as you're narrowing down on certain decision points. I would be remiss if I didn't say that we developed this structure alongside the City of Nanaimo administrative staff, after examining resources that were available to the city to reach out to the people of Nanaimo. Here you can see some of the different, or actually here you can see a catalog of all the different engagement opportunities that we tried to provide. We provided 6 highly qualitative measurements. The online survey that 1,155 people responded to. There was a certain quantitative measurement to this survey, but because of the self-selecting nature, there's no, we didn't consider it a scientific survey. We had public engagement sessions on November 24th, December 1st, and December 8th with more than 400 participants, I think 414 total. We At those sessions, there was a 2-question survey that people could fill out. We received 214 of those responses. There were 255 Facebook comments in total, 19 comments on Twitter directed at the City of Nanaimo. The emails were available to be sent by citizens to the City of Nanaimo. In the engagement period, we received 162 total of those. And of course, we ran the Bannister Research, our research partner on this, ran a statistically significant quantitative measurement of 500 completed responses in the same engagement period. There was also a 2 or a 3-question survey that was available on the back of a flyer that directed people to the online survey. 40 of those were handed in. Overall, there were about 2,745 points for review and analysis. I'm under no illusion that some people engaged in all of the input opportunities, probably sometimes several times. However, we are still very confident that this does represent multiple thousands of individuals providing input to this conversation. Just a little bit about how we collected and processed this information. All of our input was the input at the public sessions was collected by a report writer that we dispatched to each session. They were there to really capture as much tone and tenor in the sessions as possible. The report writer was provided with all the raw input from engagement opportunities, whether transcribed or as email chains, or as the raw Facebook comments. As they came in, they were provided to the writer. So the only input that we received that had some analysis done on it already was from Bannister Research, who provided a very minor data table summaries on the phone survey itself. Taking all of that input into account, the report was compiled on the basis of all of the inputs and developed into the What We Heard report that you have in front of you today. So let me get to some of those findings. So today I'm here to really report that there was no real overwhelming outcome that we can draw from the feedback given by participants. There are certainly some strong feelings on either side in one direction or the other, but there was no real groundswell to report based on the feedback that we've received so far. This isn't really that unexpected given the early nature of the conversation itself. The public consultation in this case, for some people, was really their first encounter with this issue. The biggest finding that we discovered in the analysis of all of the input is that participants really had more questions than they had answers for us. There were, and these questions ended up providing a roadmap which I'll describe later, to shape the future communication and public engagement in subsequent public engagement phases. Before we talk about the specific findings, I do quickly want to outline the findings from the telephone survey and the online public survey because they are broken out and treated specially in the report. These are really our key quantitative findings. The telephone survey, as you know, was made up of 500 completed responses, all from people from Nanaimo. One of the most important findings we found in this was that this survey tended to skew a little bit older. More than 75% of the respondents were over the age of 55. This isn't particularly surprising given that this is a landline-based telephone survey. What did surprise us, though, is that the demographic breakdown in this survey roughly aligned with the demographic breakdown in the online survey. In terms of support for the event center on this particular measure, you'll see that 50% of respondents were highly supportive, 18% were moderately supportive, and 30% were not supportive. You can also see in that and this is actually one of the more definitive findings we found across the input was that public funding only was not the most, or was one of the least popular, or was the least popular option by far for building the event center. Most participants preferred a mix of public and private funding. It would be difficult to imagine that 62.8% of respondents could favor a mix of public and private funding, and all of them would be for, and that some of them wouldn't have been registered as against the input itself. The online survey was completed by 1,555 respondents. Again, we found that the 50% of the respondents skewed, or that this was skewed older, with 50% of the respondents being over the age of 50, and a slight majority of the respondents found themselves saw themselves attending events at the event center. While it's not a perfect comparison, this does align relatively well with the supportive findings in the online telephone survey. Or sorry, in the telephone survey. So generally speaking, the feedback we received from residents revealed that, again, we had more questions than answers. Even those who identified themselves in favor or opposed to the event center themselves tended to qualify their answers with some indication that they wanted more information about the event center that might change their opinion or make them more sure in their opinion were they to receive it. The absolute key learning from this phase of the consultation is that participants require more information. However, I don't want to leave it there. I do, in fairness to the people that felt strongly one way or the other, I do want to go through the arguments in favor, or the key arguments in favor and the key arguments against. Key arguments in favor. Those in favor tended to, those who were enthusiastically in favor, as it says in the report, tended to be in favor without providing a great level of detail. The details that they did provide was that they felt this was an important asset that reflected the cultural and recreational opportunities available in Nanaimo, and that it could further fostering them, benefiting the city as a whole. They also felt that the event center is something that Nanaimo needs to keep pace with its economic growth and to attract and retain new residents and to boost tourism to some extent. Many people saw the events center as an important part of growing Nanaimo for future generations. Findings in opposition. Those who opposed the event center tended to give the following as justifications. One, they don't want to see their property taxes rise, and they don't see what the potential impact on their property tax, or they're unsure what the potential impact on their property taxes can be. They see parking and traffic as problematic with a 5,700 seat arena or a 7,100 seat arena. And they felt that some of the solutions that might be proposed for dealing with traffic concerns might create new problems like access issues for seniors. There's also a lingering fatigue around those who oppose the event center around other projects or other major projects that have been done in previous years that they felt hadn't lived up to their potential, and they're concerned that the event center will end up with the same fate. They also wonder if the event center will cannibalize some of the events and programs that might go into those previous or the aforementioned projects. The two projects they mentioned specifically were the Port Theatre and the Vancouver Island Conference Center. And finally, there's a certain faction that believe that Nanaimo simply shouldn't be focusing on this. They should be focusing on other matters. What's most striking, I think, about the comments in opposition to the event center is how many of them are based on a need to see additional information, with the exception of those who feel that Nanaimo City Council should be focusing on different initiatives. Reading the feedback, we believe that individuals who want to see council focus on different feedback are probably not going to be convinced with any additional information that will sway them out of that opinion. So as I mentioned a few times, the most thematically resonant piece of feedback here is that more information needs to be communicated before heading into the next phase of consultation. So I want to take you through some of those questions. This is as much as I'm telling you that there's no real definitive feeling out there one way or the other, one of the key things that's coming out of this is this roadmap for future communication and public engagement. And this is, I feel, good news early in the process. It's not often that you get this kind of definitive information from participants and from your feedback mechanisms. The main questions that came up were as follows. How much will the event center cost? Residents wanted to know what the final costs were going to be. A minority of respondents wanted to know what the additional costs beyond the capital cost would be. So they were looking at operational costs as well as any of the costs required to get them to the point of getting a shovel in the ground. What will the funding model for the event center be? In our experience, virtually all conversations about projects of this variety, funding model tends to be a serious sticking point. The public usually wants to examine the funding model so they can understand who benefits and exactly how they're going to benefit. Well, how will it impact property taxes? This is likely the most direct point made by those in opposition to the event center. They want to know how the build and subsequent operation will impact their annual property taxes, if at all. How can we be sure that the event center is feasible over time? A number of respondents wanted to see a credible and impartial feasibility study to feel secure that the facility would be well used and would be vibrant over the long term. What will this facility provide that other recreation and cultural facilities will not? Some respondents wanted to see assurances that the event center would not be replicating current or potential functions of facilities like the Port Theatre and the Conference Center. And as is typical with most engagement exercises, particularly ones in as early a phase as this, participants wanted to know how what the phase plan for involving the public in future consultation would be, and how councils would seek to communicate, or how council would communicate and seek the approval of the public for the facility. I think the answers to these questions provide an opportunity to equip the public and engage in this conversation further. Given your position in this conversation, this is, I think, a golden opportunity to make sure that you have listened to your public as closely as possible and that the conversation is as productive as possible before making a decision on the facility. Thank you very much for your time. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your information. I really don't have a question. I just asked, are we receiving all of these presentations? Thank you.
Thank you. No questions for the delegation? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Motion to receive the delegation. Councillor Hong, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. Thank you. Ms. Curry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would suggest the next item is correspondence, and it's just for receipt from council, so I just wanted to make that point, as well as possibly moving the delegations before the report 7A. Right now, they're speaking before the report on 7B, but I believe if you move the delegations to speak before the first report as well, that would be good. And I also forgot to let you know that the Youth Council was unavailable to make their presentation this evening. So,
Thank you. Motion to receive the delegation. It's moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next item is correspondence. There are 8 pieces here. Somebody want to move receipt of the correspondence? Councillor Thorpe, seconded by? Councillor Kipp, thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
In a typical correspondence of nature of this, we would indicate of the 8 pieces, in favor or opposed, or what the content is, because I don't know if the viewing audience here or at home has any idea of what the correspondence is and who it's from. So I think it would be appropriate to identify at the very least who the correspondence is from and their position.
Thank you. Is that by way of motion?
Thank you. Well, it's certainly by way of suggestion that it might be reasonableness for us to allow the community that's here and the community that is not here watching on TV or observing in a future repeat of this, that they are well aware of who has provided letters, be it in support or not.
Thank you. Ms. Curry?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted, through you to Councillor Beswick, all of the letters are posted as supplemental items if they came late, or they're part of the agenda package for the public to see. And where it was clear, I do believe it does say from so-and-so in support of, and if it was clear that they were in support, if not, the letters themselves are posted as supplemental items.
So to be clear, the letters that you're seeing here, the correspondence you're seeing here, is all on the website as a supplemental item. Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to make the suggestion that the letters be posted, so Ms. Gurry is way ahead of me. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, just to note that some are not in support of one specific location. They aren't specific as to whether it's against the event center or not. So,
thank you. Right.
Most ones.
So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, Mayor's report. Pardon me?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I believe Mayor's report was next, and we were moving the delegations before the 7A.
That's the way I read it, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tonight, Council wishes to inform Nanaimo residents, businesses, and industry of a decision made December 15th regarding economic development. Over the next few minutes, I will outline changes to the alignment of the city's economic development function. I will reaffirm Council's support for resources and strategies that enable the growth and diversification of our community's economy, and I will emphasize Council's desire to work with individuals from across Nanaimo who serve as experts, leaders, and champions in business and industry. Last August, Council approved an updated strategic plan for the period of 2016 through 2019. Among the plan's 5 community values is a direct reference to economic health, and specifically creating a vibrant culture of innovation, stewardship, and partnership to encourage a healthy economy, including diverse jobs that enable our residents and businesses to thrive, values reflecting our unique community in a changing world, strong partnerships and collaboration with the private sector, educational institutions, First Nations, other levels of government, and other organizations, environmental stewardship, and an innovative atmosphere supporting creativity and entrepreneurialism. Today, Council finds itself at a crossroads with respect to delivering on this community value by means of the resource created to oversee economic development, the Nanaimo Economic Development Corporation. Of concern is the current standing of the NEDC's board and the status of the CEO, with the former being low on membership and the latter being vacant for the 4th time in 5 years. Efforts to replace the board's membership have thus far generated only minor interest, while the work needed to replace the CAO may take up to 4 months. By way of these circumstances, combined with the need to pass the 2017 to 2021 financial plan and to expediently deliver on the economic values contained in the city's updated strategic plan, Council has decided to wind down the operations of the NEDC by January 31st and replace it with a commission chaired by the Mayor and supported by membership drawn from the following sectors. 1, business. 2, regional government. 3, First Nations. 4, port and airport authorities. 5, post-secondary education. 6, construction. 7, labor. And 8, business development. Additional members may be added with knowledge and experience related to areas such as transportation, forestry, manufacturing, healthcare, tourism, retail, professional and technical services. To support this commission, 2 CUPE positions drawn from the current NEDC staff will return to the city, along with a future option to add a manager role. Operationally, these positions will enable the commission to implement its vision while relying on the resources from City Hall, including financial services, human resources, IT, and communications. Through this integration, it's expected that significant administrative savings will be made. To date, we've been informed that 4 remaining members of the NEDC board have expressed their interest in joining the new commission. On behalf of Council, I welcome the experience and the dedication these volunteers bring as they begin the process of initiating this new delivery model. Likewise, I wish to acknowledge past board members who, along with NEDC staff, committed their time and ideas to advancing our community's economic interests. So with the former NEDC board members seated, it is my immediate hope that the new commission can be initially formed and prepared to hold its first meeting in January, where the process of providing direction to staff within the Economic Development Group can begin. As Mayor, I'm motivated to chair this commission. My enthusiasm will be drawn from spearheading a renewed commitment to Nanaimo that demonstrates Council's desire to promote and provide a positive business environment while successfully sparking the attention and imagination of the creative and diversified industries being established around the world. In the coming weeks, I will seek the involvement of the brightest and most outgoing among our community to join us in creating this business climate and savvy that's on par with Canada's most progressive cities. And I want to reiterate that, that when that decision was made, it was a unanimous decision of Council. Thank you very much. So the next item is under Events Center Development Principles. And we have, pardon me?
We're going into delegations, Your Worship.
That's correct. I just wanted to correct something, a statement that I just made that was incorrect, and that is that it was a majority vote of Council by a vote of 8-1. So, Event Center next steps. The first, we have 9 delegations, and if I beg your indulgence, Council, I'd like to move one of the delegations forward, and that's first off Mr. Mark McDonald of the Yes Committee. And each delegation will have 5 minutes.
So much. I seem to come down with the flu this evening, so I appreciate the movement. My name is Mark McDonald. I live at 2535 Elk Trails Way, South Nanaimo. I'm a commercial property owner in the city of Nanaimo. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to address Council about excuse me, the entertainment and sports complex that has become such a hot topic of discussion in Nanaimo these days. This is the first time in my time in Nanaimo, I moved here in 1978, that I've seen the majority of Council and staff on the same page concerning an entertainment and sports complex. That in itself makes the possibility of such an important piece of social infrastructure seem like it could actually become a reality. And I'd like to applaud City Council for introducing a 0% tax increase during their current fiscal year. That's something we called for regularly. When I was the managing editor of the Nanaimo Daily News, it almost brought tears to my eyes. And I would also congratulate Council on introducing a cohesive plan that, if implemented, will improve the quality of life for Nanaimo residents and make our city a real attraction, which will boost tourism and perhaps even lead to the development of a new hotel. Well done. I've been promoting an entertainment and sports complex in Nanaimo now for almost 20 years. As a founding member of Yes Nanaimo, I'm sure other members have tired of me proclaiming again and again the benefits of having such a facility here. When I was president of the Greater Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce, we held meetings with the city about an entertainment and sports complex. I've argued many times over that an entertainment and sports complex should have been built before the conference center, as it would have provided a significant boost to the city's tourism efforts and give us a gathering place for people throughout the Central Island for important entertainment and sporting events. Nanaimo is the only community of its size in British Columbia that does not have a facility like this, to our detriment, I must add. I have published newspapers throughout BC, so we're all over British Columbia, and we are the only ones. An entertainment and sports complex is much more than a hockey rink, although having a Western Hockey League team here would provide over 40 tenant nights per year. It is a community gathering place where we would be able to watch first-class, world-renowned talent without traveling elsewhere. A former mayor used to infamously say that if anybody wanted to build an entertainment and sports complex in Nanaimo, they could just write us a check. I reminded him on several occasions that there wasn't a business person in Canada who would do such a thing. I think discussions like that have been counterproductive, as it carries a suggestion that these ventures are moneymakers that the private sector is lining up to build. Nothing can be further than the truth. Last spring, I attended a Fraser Institute Economic Symposium in Vancouver, and one of the presenters was from Wisconsin, and he shared about entertainment and sports complexes. He stated very clearly it is not fair or realistic to suggest that these buildings make money. They do not. He did point out that they are important social infrastructure, but that they need the help and bookings from the city in order to make the numbers work. He said an entertainment and sports complex needs to be viewed much the same as a park or a swimming pool. It's a community investment that we can all enjoy. When I think of all the tax dollars that have been spent over the years here, I must say I catch myself at times. I think about the province forcing us to build the water treatment plant. I think about them forcing us to the city to pay for unnecessary work at the Colliery Dams. And the answer to progress is not no to everything. It's saying yes to the right project. I don't mind paying taxes if I can see the results. And I've been a frequent user of the Nanaimo Aquatic Center. It's a tremendous facility. And when I sit in there and I look around with the people enjoying what it offers, I must say it feels good. This is what came from our tax dollars. This is what we help pay for. Another point is that we need more ice. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the last 2 weeks there have been double bookings on facilities, Nanaimo ice facilities, involving out-of-town teams. We don't have enough ice. The Novice Hockey League now is starting their games 10:45, 11 o'clock at night. We are under-serviced, and we need more ice for the demand that's out there. Frank Crane Arena is 20 years past its best before date. It needs replacement yesterday. And Nanaimo needs an entertainment and sports complex. Cranbrook has one. Abbotsford has one. Chilliwack has one. Langley has one. Kamloops has one. Prince George has one. Victoria has one. And Kelowna has one. Every city our size in BC has one. And Nanaimo needs one. I believe that if situated properly, an entertainment and sports complex would not only boost our tourism industry and be a meeting place for generations to come, but it could be a catalyst to transform our city downtown in much the same way that it has in Kelowna. A once derelict industrial area has now become a major arts and entertainment hub surrounded by thriving businesses and high-end residential developments. I've supported the idea of an entertainment and sports complex in Nanaimo for many years, and I support it today. And again, I congratulate Council for bringing it to the fore for our consideration, and I hope with all my heart that Nanaimo overwhelmingly embraces this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Curry, are you on? Okay. Ms. Brennan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald, for your remarks. Nice to have a long-term perspective that you brought tonight. I just did want to make one comment, though. I was very careful to ask our consultants about the state of the Frank Crane Arena because they did review it. And our consultant's opinion, the Frank Crane Arena is in very good shape and would be expected to last for several years hence.
I beg to differ. You should play in it.
Well, anyway, that is the expert opinion of the
Thank you, sir.
consultants.
No other questions. Move receipt, seconder. Councillor Hong, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next speaker is Mr. John Dacombe. And that will be followed by Ms. Wanda Thompson.
Let me just get some water. I have a cold. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I spoke here a few weeks ago against city funding for an outdoor skating rink. At that time, Councillor Beswick spoke proudly of the 0% tax increase for 2016. Here we are a few weeks later, and we have 2017 tax increases that appear to be above the rate of inflation pretty much across the board. What Councillor Beswick failed to mention here in November is that even in 2016, we saw fee increases well above the rate of inflation. And remember, if every homeowner has to pay for something, whether it's water, sewer, whatever, it's a tax if it's going to the government. So on top of these existing taxes, tax increases, we could have public funding of a WHL arena that will cost, based on the sums that we're seeing now, which I question, 250% more than was spent, that will be spent in 2016 on all the engineering and public works programs put together in the city of Nanaimo. So basically, you're proposing spending 2.5 times more to build something we don't need than all the core infrastructure spending in 2016 that keeps the city running. And do we want the taxpayers of Nanaimo, who have an average income a little over $48,000 a year, to pay for this WHL arena when WHL franchise owners are amongst Canada's wealthiest 1%? Let's see some examples of that. Vancouver Giants, part owner Michael Bublé, well-known crooner. Everybody loves Michael Bublé. Net worth over $150 million. Edmonton Oil Kings owner Daryl Katz. He's worth $4.14 billion US, billion with a B. Of course, you say those are large market teams. It's the small market teams like Nanaimo that would have a real problem, the franchises in a town like Nanaimo. But then you have Victoria Royals owner Graham Lee. His company, GSL Holdings, it's one of BC's largest private employers. Annual revenues of over $50 million. Or there's Kamloops Blazers, owned by a bunch of rich guys, ex-hockey players, and Tom Gagliardi, whose family's worth over $2.2 billion. So the many municipalities, and there are many, as was just explained, that have used public funds to pay for professional sports venues have in essence been taken by very rich, very smart businessmen who claim they cannot afford to build these venues for themselves, and it should be the hard-pressed individual taxpayer making $48K that should pay for it. Don't take my word for it. Don't take the word of economists paid by companies that are trying to sell you a product. I could not find a single independent, peer-reviewed economic analysis of the public funding of professional sports venues. Not one independent analysis. Remember, we had an economist speak earlier. It's not an independent peer-review analysis. He is doing an analysis because he works for a company that's trying to sell you a product. An independent peer-reviewed analysis is the only kind you can trust. You can't trust me, you can't trust them. Not one of these concluded that the public funding of professional sports venues, was of net economic benefit to the municipality in which they were built. The people who will claim public funding of these venues is of net benefit are the developers, the architects, the sports franchise owners, everyone who will gain financially at the expense of the taxpayers, and sports enthusiasts who believe these claims. So I encourage each of you to do independent research to see what a scam this really is. So rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, that if you vote for the public funding of this WHL arena, and let's be clear, this is a WHL arena. It's not a multiplex. It's not an event center. It's not a sports and event center. It is a WHL, professional sports venue. If you use public funds to pay for that, three things will happen, I guarantee you. Nanaimo will incur massive debt. Sooner or later, Nanaimo will incur massive property tax increases. And politically, I think you will lose more votes than you gain in the 2018 elections. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Wanda Thompson. There's no questions for you, sir. Oh, Councillor Hong.
I do have a question.
Sure.
There's a lot of things that we don't need in Nanaimo. We don't need a water treatment plant. Our water's great, but we had to do it. We don't need a waste treatment plant, but we have to do it. And we did not need the damn dams to be done, but we did it. A lot of things we don't need, but we had to do. Just to point that out, clarify.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Kipp, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Ms. Wanda Thompson. The next one up is Catherine Jane Hazel. Good evening, Ms. Thompson. Or good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, fellow citizens. My name is Wanda Thompson, and I live in Brecken Hill in Nanaimo. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to present my views about the proposed multiplexer event centre this evening. Before I begin, I'd like to recognize Councillor Hong, who engaged with me on this issue and provided information, even though we disagree. I am a new resident of Nanaimo and chose to move to this city because of the weather, the oceans, the mountains, the parks, streams, lakes, and warm West Coast hospitality. Nanaimo is a city in transition, moving from a natural resource base to a service and knowledge-based economy. I want to see our city thrive and prosper, foster economic development, and attract investment. There are many ways to do this, but I do not see a publicly funded event center as the solution. I have two key messages for you. One, I do not support an event center that is funded by my municipal tax dollars. Two, you do not have the clear consent of taxpayers of this city to proceed with this project, and you have an obligation to hold a referendum. First, I do not want my tax dollars used to build this center. This council has made promises to keep our taxes low and recently boasted about how taxes did not go up last year. A publicly funded event center that costs the equivalent of nearly an entire year's budget and that requires debt financing just to build it will result in significant tax increases amounting to thousands of dollars for every taxpayer. And based on the presentations that we just heard from consultants, it's only confirmed that there are many additional and ongoing and hidden costs that taxpayers will be expected to absorb. This city is already paying for two costly infrastructure projects, the Port Theatre and the Convention Centre. And from what I hear, neither is making money and in fact continue to cost the city and taxpayers. Claims have been made by councillors and consultants alike that event centres attract investment. In fact, economists repeatedly demonstrate that publicly funded sports arenas provide no overall net economic benefit to citizens. When we saw the presentations from the accountants earlier, they showed us a bunch of money moving around. They didn't show us making any money from that. I do not want my hard-earned tax dollars subsidizing multi-million-dollar sports franchises and their rich owners. If they want to come to Nanaimo, they can pay for their own rink. I want my tax dollars spent in a fiscally prudent manner, starting with basics and priorities, not on luxury items like a hockey arena that only the well-off can afford to attend. We need more affordable housing, better transportation, and a decent waste and recycling program for starters. There are many options available for financing public infrastructure projects, including private investment and contributions from grants and contributions from other levels of government. The full range of budget options needs to be examined so you, councillors, can honour your promise not to raise taxes. Second, As elected officials, you are here to represent the citizens of this city. This means showing leadership and vision, and it also means being responsive and listening to your constituents. Not one of you here campaigned on this multiplex in 2014, and nor did any of you mention it in your platforms. Suddenly, halfway through your notorious tenures, the multiplex shoots out of nowhere as the top city priority, fast-tracked like a slap shot. Presentations and consultations in the weeks before the holidays by a developer and consultants who clearly have vested interests and who conveniently build arenas have little legitimacy as consultations and were more like a hard sell to convince us that this is the only game in town. And from this evening's presentations, I feel like we're all being spoken to like these decisions have already been taken and that we're already moving forward with the next phase. You have a democratic obligation and responsibility as stewards of our city and the public purse to hold a referendum on this issue. You owe us this to regain our trust in your elected offices and to demonstrate that the best interest of the city are your guiding principles, not your own interest in attracting a hockey team and circus performers. In closing, Nanaimo has great potential, and having a vision for the future is key. However, municipal tax dollars should not be used to fund this event center. Further, you do not have the political capital to proceed with this initiative without holding a referendum first. Finally, before I take my seat, and as I have now done twice in writing, I will once again call on Councillor Kipp to apologize for the misogynist remarks that you made here in Council on November 21st, 2016. The fact that none of you called him out or stood up for your colleague is equally sad to me. Mr. Kipp, the women and the citizens of Nanaimo await your apology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Fuller has a question for you.
So you will, if this thing is built, you will never use it, period? Never?
I'd like to see it built with a better distribution of funding from the private sector and other levels of government, not by municipal tax
I got
dollars.
that from your.
I don't disagree.
I got that from your presentation. Yeah,
I don't disagree with the event
it.
center. I just don't want it to be paid for 100% by
Good.
municipal tax
so
dollars.
If we do boring, we would have to have a referendum. But what I want to tell you is I likely will never use that. I don't like sports. I don't watch sports. I don't do sports. I go for walks in the woods. I will likely never use it. But I'm keeping an open mind on it because I know people that will. Mm-hmm. And what I don't like particularly that we're getting is a lot of stuff around. We need more affordable housing. We need the poor. We need to bring up the poor. I work with them every day. I work with the chronically homeless. I feed the hungry in the city of Nanaimo. And these are people that when I talk to them, they would like to see it. The costs to go to a hockey game, WHL, from my understanding, are what, 20, 30 bucks? Not even that. So one can budget to go see a hockey game, but one can't budget to go see a hockey game over in Vancouver because it's going to cost you 80 bucks for the ferry. It's going to cost you 150 bucks for a hotel room, and then 14 bucks for the event. So I'll never use it, but I am keeping an open mind. I want a referendum. If we go to borrowing, there will be a referendum. And then people will get their say. And that's the way it should be. But I will likely never use it. Unless, of course, Roger Waters comes. I'm not even going to Vancouver because it cost me too much. But I could afford to.
Was there a question for me? Or
No, apparently not. Thank you, ma'am. I want to remind the folks in the gallery that, as I said earlier, that there will be no booing and no clapping. We want everyone to be able to be heard. So it is now 9 o'clock, and we have a scheduled recess for 9 p.m. We have 7 more. Okay. Council wants to carry on? Thank you. Okay. The next one is Catherine Jane Hazel, followed by Gary Wycombe. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Hello, my name is Catherine Jane Hazel, and I'm the Vice Chair of the South End Community Association, or SECA, as it's commonly known. Our Chairman, Sandy McClellan, wishes to give his apologies to Council for not attending tonight, but as a grocer, this is his busiest time of the year. As you know, the South End Community Association voted unanimously at its annual general meeting December 7th to strongly oppose the construction of the proposed event center on the Wellcox lands at 1 Port Place. At the meeting, our members also asked that Nanaimo City Council affirm the community consultation process taken as part of the South Downtown Waterfront Initiative. SECA was one of the stakeholders on the South Downtown Waterfront Committee, with our former chairman, Douglas Hardy, taking an active role in its deliberations. The South Downtown Waterfront Initiative put extensive time and effort into creating a vision for the waterfront area that borders our neighborhood, and its findings, which clearly showed no material support for a multiplex on the waterfront, should not be ignored. The South Downtown Waterfront Initiative website survey had a 3-to-1 ratio against having the multiplex on the Wellcox lands. The Harbor Fair, attended by more than 400 people, revealed little or limited support for a multiplex on the site, and the Ideas Forum, with 80 participants, also recorded no support for a multiplex. In addition, a design charrette in which 34 people worked for 3 days to develop 4 visions for the site again showed no support for a multiplex. And the final South Downtown Waterfront Initiative's technical report's common theme summary concluded that there was no desire for a multiplex on the Wellcox lands. SECA has other concerns about having the multiplex on the Wellcox site. There are no provisions for dedicated parking. There is also no plan for a multimodal transportation hub, long considered a part of Nanaimo's transportation plan. It also concerns us that there seems to have been no consultation with our close neighbors, the Snuneymuxw First Nation, about the development of the multiplex, which will sit on the site of a traditional Snuneymuxw village at the north end of the Wellcox lands. In conclusion, we at SECA believe that the South Downtown Waterfront Initiative showed us the enormous potential for developing the waterfront lands in a way that serves all of the community and that will create a vibrant center for downtown Nanaimo. We must not let this opportunity be wasted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Thank you very much. The South Downtown Waterfront Initiative was an excellent initiative. A lot of people got involved. One of the concerns I have when I've traveled in a couple of places, say for example in Vancouver, the South Downtown Waterfront had a lot of density. They talked about density down there. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Who can afford that type of density? I have a beautiful house here in Nanaimo, a nice piece of land, average value around Nanaimo. I couldn't sell that in one of those densely located populations that our governments have chased tax revenue on. I couldn't afford to live down in Vancouver because of density and the high-rise development, the concrete development. So do you actually think that's an affordable form of housing that was planned through that area? Do you actually think, because I've heard tonight, affordability, basic service. High-rise condominiums or 6-, 7-story condominiums are not cheap to live in. Those type of developments aren't. Have you thought of that?
The design charrette did not propose tall concrete condominiums.
Well, it had density, and I'm just saying, have you considered from the South End point of view, and I grew up in the South End, family had businesses in the South End, the old Hub Cafe, still feel fond of that area. And do you actually think that's an affordable design now that we're going to this massive density? Because you look in some of our new subdivisions in Nanaimo and our new planning, the people here are having trouble affording it. So I'm saying the plan was a beautiful image and vision, but no one funds a vision. So that's why you have to go through the whole analysis of financial analysis, cost-benefit analysis, to really see if a project has value. And the downtown waterfront is a great vision, just like our OCP is. And it's a growing, living document that you try and design and change. And I attended a couple of the workshops on that, but I really have a concern when we look at this massive density and the Granville Island type of model for our community that I doubt if a lot of people here can afford. And that's just a vision. And so have you looked at the analysis of the cost of those 4 designs?
I haven't personally, no, and I don't have that material to hand.
It's not there.
Okay.
It was a vision. So I appreciate it. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yocum.
Thank you for your presentation and championing the South End and Sanamo. And being on, just want to touch on the Sanamo comment, is on 14 straight years on Sanamo Council before I joined this council, not once did Sanamo did not participate in the South Downtown Waterfront Group work. So I just want to be crystal clear when I hear Sanamo, and sometimes not seeing yourself, but a lot of people use the Sanamo conversation when it's beneficial. And being a Sanamo member, and I was on that council on the day, and presently I did not participate in the South Down Waterfront Group for obviously their reasons. So I just want to be crystal clear on that. And has Sanamo been consulted or had conversation on this? Well, I can't say it at this point, but I'm sure there's been some conversations. We'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Brennan.
I just want to say that the South Nanaimo Downtown Waterfront Initiative is an excellent plan. It fulfilled all of the obligations, I think, that we have to consult with our community and in particular the neighborhood surrounding. It was, to me, it was like having made a promise that these were the principles we were going to use when we developed that area. I still believe that. Thank you for bringing it.
Thank you.
Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Firstly, I just want to appreciate all of the people that have come tonight and all of the people that are speaking for or against, of course. I have to make the comment about the fact that the parcel of property, the Port Drive, is industrial. And when we speak to the value systems that will allow that to develop, at some point in time, whatever it is going to take money. And it's going to take public money, and it's going to take private money. Directly across the street from the tracks, and I have to bring this up because I'm hearing the discrediting of people that are fortunate enough to have wealth, that are wealthy. And without those, it would be nice if some of them would come here. And it would be nice if some of them would expend their hard-earned monies and fortunes here. And one gentleman and his family have done that right across the street from the industrial rails. And they've built what appears to be, on the inside and the outside, a gorgeous venue. They have space to build 2 more of those. On his property, which my conversation, which he reached out to me, was that when that property in front of me, my front yard, starts to be developed, or the city starts to make some commitments that they're serious about transforming that property, then I'll start building my next 2 projects. And that's just one example. And so from my perspective, to be critical of folk that have the ability to do things is really counterproductive to being able to develop the growth in our city, in our tax base, in everything that we do, especially on a piece of property now that is generating us literally nothing. So we have to take some important and serious steps in order to a previous speaker's mind, to maximize our potential or to reach our potential or start to think about our potential. We need to do that. A previous speaker mentioned about that Frank Crane Arena is in good shape. Well, that's good. But it's not of the capacity to be able to draw or attract any event to the city of Nanaimo other than ice skating and an occasional hockey game. We used to, back in the day when the venue was one of the nicest facilities in the province, but we've been surpassed. And so I'm going to stay off my box here about sports tourism. Hasn't been mentioned yet, but I've heard that it's $1 billion industry across the country, and we've missed that boat. That doesn't come from me, that comes from professionals. When I hear and I know what our expenditures are on that facility just to maintain it the way it is today. So the sound system is awful, the load in, load out is awful, there's no events ever coming there. So at some point in time, and we heard the gentleman say tonight that if we built it 10 years ago, it was 60. If we build it 10 years from now, it's 117, 120. So at some point in time, our city has to make an investment in its potential and in its future. And I get that people don't like the sites that have been selected for one reason or t'other. And I do assume that people are going to have a chance to voice their pleasures or displeasures in this opportunity of investing in our future generations. And if we choose not to, that's fine. We'll move on with other opportunities.
I would just like to remind Mr. Bestwick that I was speaking about council affirming the community consultation process taken as part of the South Downtown Waterfront Initiative. That's what I was speaking about.
Thank you.
Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. I would just like to say thank you for you taking the time to come here and share your opinion. And I think it's a valid enough opinion, as well as everybody else's opinion, whether you're for or against. I really appreciate the time that the Neighborhood Association took in participating in the South Downtown Waterfront planning. And as I do anybody that takes the time, steps up to the plate, and actually does work on a volunteer basis to support our community moving forward. So thank you very much for your hard work, and thank you for coming here today to share your opinions.
Thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
Just one question and a couple comments. Thanks, Catherine, for coming up. I was a member of SECA for eons, vice chair for over 12 years, and I've lived in that area for 25, 30 of my 34 years. Love that area. When the South Downtown Nanaimo Waterfront Initiative was being done, I loathed the idea of wasting that space on a transit hub. Because at that time, we had an MOU for the majority of the space to go to a transit hub. That would have left little for what the South Downtown Waterfront Initiative proposed. Very little. And if that MOU had have gone through, I believe it just ran out last year, and we did not renew it, you'd have a transit hub down there now. And I'm not saying that's the place to do the event center or whatever, but the question I have for you is, the only thing I've heard tonight is you're not opposed to the event center, just it being located at One Port Drive.
We didn't poll our members on that. Basically, what we discussed was our big concern was the fact that we'd put so much effort into that initiative, and it just didn't seem to be recognized or taken into consideration.
The location was what you debated.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Bestwick, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next speaker is Mr. Gary Wakeham on behalf of the Protection Island Neighborhood Association, followed by Mr. Kim Smythe. Good evening, sir.
Thank you. It's awesome that you allow us to come and speak like this. Over my career, I've been involved in many public participation exercises, and I would just like to compliment you on what a great job you've done to date. I went to the one on December the 8th. It was very well attended, well organized. Staff were very informative. The boards were there, people to make the comments. Now, whether I agreed with them or not is another question, but I just think so far you've done a really good job as far as that goes. I'm a citizen of Nanaimo. I live on Protection Island. I'm also president of the Protection Island Neighborhood Association. With me tonight are several people also from the board of directors, the fellow in the black hat with the skull and crossbones, don't be scared, all the way over to the big boy in the red fleece jacket there, all from the Protection Island Neighborhood Association. We have about 100 members. There's about 375 people we think live on Protection Island, given the phone book that we've put together and the participants in that. I'd like to make it really clear that I'm here speaking on behalf of the Protection Island Neighborhood Association. I had also asked if I could speak as Gary Wycombe, as a private citizen, and ran into some issues with that because there seemed to be a conflict that my name was showing up twice. But I would still ask council, I'm still looking for an opportunity somewhere here tonight to speak as a private citizen, but making it really clear, here I am talking for the Neighborhood Association. Just picking up on the last questions, we have had no discussion and are not getting involved as a neighborhood association as to whether an event center is needed or not, whether to support it or not support it. We're simply here to talk about the location. That is our only concern. Living on Protection Island, the harbor is our front yard. We use it for recreation, but primarily we use it as our transportation route to get to the city. It is our roadway into the community. Right now, anytime we come to the city, we try to get downtown, we have to either go through private property, private marinas, or we have to go through something that's controlled by the Nanaimo Port Authority. And this has been disconcerting to us because there is nowhere except for the Wellcox lands that we actually have access into downtown or have potential for access in downtown because the city of Nanaimo owns it. The Port Authority is not an elected body. They've got a different agenda than what City Council has. And so for us, the Wellcox land, we see this as an important point in the future for us getting access into the downtown and into the city of Nanaimo. The South Downtown Waterfront Initiative, we looked at with quite a bit of admiration. The principles that were in there said to promote access and connectivity. That supported us to be able to get into Nanaimo. It talked about supporting an evolving working harbor. And we share that roadway with industrial users, recreation users, and it is a working harbor today. It talks about promoting ecologically positive development, bold and resilient land uses, and embed cultural and social considerations into the decision. When we went through these guiding principles as a neighborhood association, and we looked at them and said, well, in terms of promoting access and connectivity, it looks to us that we've got a huge building here that hadn't been anticipated in the plan. It looks like it's shoehorned into an incremental piece of land. It's right up against Front Street, and it's going to be a great wall. I mean, even if it is architectural features on the outside, it is a huge, massive wall along Front Street. And we're wondering, well, what is that doing for allowing people to see the waterfront or make their way down to the waterfront? We see this as potentially being a barrier in the future. We looked at, is it in fact going to promote harbor vitality? This is a building that has people primarily coming into it to look inwards at events. It's not something where people are spilling out of this center to go and use the harbor, use the activities along the way. And so we feel that those two guiding principles are being compromised as a result of this development. Now, there was three other principles: ecological positive development, bold and resilient land use, cultural and social considerations in the decision making. We don't have enough information yet to comment on those ones, though tonight I was much more encouraged when I saw the design for the building, which is that was released on Friday afternoon, that actually I would suggest that cultural considerations are being shown much more sensitively in the decision. But we're still of the opinion that the first two guiding principles have not been met, that in fact this is not the appropriate site for the Wellcox lands. One last thing I would just like to leave you with. As much as I was very excited with the public participation process that occurred there, at the December 8th meeting, I will not name the alderman, but I did have a chat with several other people with an alderman, And I was of the opinion that a public engagement process is one where council was in fact engaging the public, asking them what they thought. And in talking to one alderman, I came with a distinct impression his mind was made up. He was not listening to what the public were having to say. In fact, I would describe it more as a hard sell for the project. And all I want to just throw out here is I think that as a council member, you're in a tough spot. You do have to make a decision in the end. But I think until you actually are asked to make that decision, you need to keep an open mind. You need to collect all the information. Tonight was a tidal wave of information that only came out on Friday afternoon, information that hadn't been available at the previous public information meetings. So I very much support what came out from the gentleman who talked about public consultation, that in fact in the future, now that we have this more information that is out in the public or will be out in the public, that in fact the public engagement process can probably be even more valuable to council for the type of comments that they're going to receive.
Thank you, sir. I don't see any questions for you. Motion, Councillor Fuller.
Yeah. Can't pronounce your last name.
It's Wycombe.
Mr. Wycombe had contacted me and asked me if I could put him on the agenda to speak, but when I saw his name on the agenda, I thought, oh, great, he's already there. So would it be possible to add him as a late delegation to speak on his own behalf, not on the behalf of the... yeah, so if I could make that motion, I would do so.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to add Mr. Wycombe to the delegation to the delegate list. Any discussion? Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say that he did request to speak twice, but we didn't want to set precedents. We only allow a speaker to speak one time. So if somebody else wanted to speak on behalf of the Protection Island Neighborhood Association, he could have spoken as himself, but this is to prevent people from associations and or committees speaking twice on the same subject.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fuller?
I was just going to say I once...
Thank you. There is a motion on the floor, however. It's been moved and seconded, taking into account Ms. Gurry's advice. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Councillors Brennan, Bestwick, and Thorpe opposed. Motion carries. No, he can come to the end. There's other speakers. Mr. Kim Smythe. Yes, thank you. Moved, receipt, seconded by, is there a seconder? Councillor Bestwick, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Gartshore will be next. Mr. Smythe.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, very much for receiving me tonight. As stated in the agenda, I am here on behalf of the Greater Nanaimo Chamber of Commerce. Just over a month ago, the Chamber issued a press release and a letter of support for the city's public engagement activities as part of the feasibility studies around the Nanaimo Events Centre. We pointed out at that time the importance of public input to decision-making and stated we would promote community participation through our communications network and social media channels. We've been doing that these past weeks. We've also attended each of the information sessions. We've spoken with the public at length at these events, and we've discussed the project around our board table and one-on-one with members. Finally, after helping members inform themselves about what could be Nanaimo's most significant infrastructure development project, we conducted an online survey of Chamber members and community partners. We had a great response rate on this survey, obviously telling us that a lot of people want to talk about it and want to have their opinions heard. I think we saw those numbers show up when Mr. Anderson spoke earlier, and I was quite surprised that many of our responses and many of the opinions that we measured really align with what Mr. Anderson said. It was quite surprising to me, but maybe shouldn't be, because after all, these are businesses in Nanaimo. Businesses in Nanaimo are owned by Nanaimo residents, so we're likely to get the same kind of opinions. So, First question we asked, and it was a very brief survey, do you support an event center as vital to our community's future? 1/3 of our respondents declared it vital. Yet 2/3 to 3/4 of responses were favorable in general. There's the numbers there. You can see that very similar to what the public survey said, show me the money, ranked at around 10% of responses. And surprisingly, 10% of respondents had additional comments on the questions. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Question number 2, do you feel an event center would have a positive effect on our economy? Nearly 2/3 stated this would have a positive economic impact. Again, reflective of the public survey. Question number 3, what do you see as the most favorable funding option? 1/4 did not want to see any impact on taxpayers, but nearly 2/3 indicated the city should bear some of the costs, but not go it alone. So those are the highlights of some of the other comments that came to our attention. Proceed slowly. Again, Mr. Anderson's survey said the same thing. Exercise caution. Again, we need a solid business case. We've heard this over and over again. And we need to explore public-private partnerships. The overriding sentiment was do it, but the cautionary notes came forward at that point in time. It's clear, however, that the business community sees the benefit of positive economic impact through a variety of outcomes, including the potential for influencing complementary development. I think that is the most exciting part of it. The chance to have this inspire complementary, adjacent development to spur the development and investment community on to the idea that, yes, Nanaimo is open for business. This, of course, more greatly emphasized when we establish a public-private partnership and when we start doing business with others around this project. For these reasons, the Chamber supports taking the next steps in studying funding and financing options, design development, and continuing community and stakeholder consultations to provide more answers to the community on these very important questions. So thank you very much, Council.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions for you, sir.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Thorpe and seconded by Councillor Pratt. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Garcher. The next one up will be Mr. Henry Traw.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's the first time I've been here for quite a long time, and I'm glad to be back. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I would like to, first of all, acknowledge the thrust of this, as I see it. The thrust is to improve the city of Nanaimo. And I think this would be a great legacy for you if you're able to get this off the ground. So I understand that as a thrust, as a reason why we would do this. And I appreciate that. The problem, as I see it, is there is very little appetite from people I hear to build it almost entirely by city money. It's a very expensive project. And it means that either taxes go up to pay for it, because even if you borrow the money, you still have to pay that back plus interest, or else other services will suffer that otherwise would be covered with our tax money. So we've got something that is a potential benefit to the city, and we've got lots of opposition. So how could we do this? How could we move this forward if it indeed is in the best interest of the city of Nanaimo? Which is a question I have no answer for. In order to be able to build this as it's currently visioned, it would require a great deal of transportation infrastructure. Might mean widening highways. I heard that there would be some widening necessary. It would mean more traffic downtown. It would mean far more parking spots downtown. That, too, has expenses for us that are long-term. I think that really, if we want to build this, we need to do it right. Because there's no sense in building something if we haven't prepared for it adequately. And I don't think that the city of Nanaimo has prepared for this, and I'll tell you why. I also think that if we did prepare for this, there would be far more benefits. And here's some of the benefits I think would occur. If we prepared for this adequately, we could reduce the cost to this building. If we prepared for it, we could make the Howard Johnson site more feasible. If we prepared for it, we would make the city of Nanaimo far more attractive to younger adults, which is, I think, a very laudable goal. I'm getting long in tooth, and I think a few other people here are. I think it really is important for us to attract young adults to the city, and right now they're not happy with one thing I'm going to raise. If we prepared for it properly, we would reduce the pollution in the city of Nanaimo. We would reduce the number of deaths. We would reduce the number of costs for the large percentage of the population. This would help poor people, as well as students, as well as youth, as well as seniors. It would improve our physical well-being and our social outcomes. And then we would be ready for the center. Oh, and I might also add that if we did it correctly, the way I think it needs to be done, that we would uphold the vision that has been put together by so many citizens and others for the downtown land, as well as for the transportation master plan. And that's where I'm going to go. We have vision statements. We have already carefully thought about how we're going to make our city a great city. And unless we are going to embrace some of those components, then we're going to make this unduly expensive. If we built out the transportation infrastructure that this city needs, urgently, badly needs, including dedicated cycling trails and walking trails and a better built-out transportation system, a transit, if we were to do that, then we wouldn't need as many car spots in this center. We would need to have way less money spent on this because we wouldn't need the parking spots because we actually fulfilled the transportation master plan. We wouldn't need to add highways and widths. We wouldn't need to worry about how many car spots there are because we would be satisfying the needs of the city. If we start there and invest this kind of money into that, then this will be a world-class city. And then, with that in place, we will far more easily be able to build this center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions for you, sir. Motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Bestwick, seconded by Councillor Pratt. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next one is Mr. Henry Trough, followed by Mr. Don Bonner.
Your Worship, Council, exciting times for Nanaimo. I wish more people talked about the the benefits this would have for us. So I'm speaking on behalf of our Hotel Association here in Nanaimo for all our hotels. And, you know, when you guys build it, and you don't want to say they'll come, but they'll give us jobs for the people that need the jobs. We hire the dishwashers, the busboys, the maids. We hire people that in our industry that are starting positions in our field. And we need to keep our people employed. Right now, we talk about how great we're doing. Yeah, we're busy. June, July, August, September, October, we're doing great. We need this business for November, December, January, February, and March. When we have these hockey teams that come in, some people say, well, what does that mean? It means 24 rooms I sell for one hockey team, not including scouts, coaches, parents, grandparents, anybody else that's going to come watch the games. It doesn't include the concerts that you guys will book. If you book a concert for 5,000 people, all our hotels will be full. Done. Guaranteed. Because look at the numbers. It speaks for itself. Take a look at what it could do for employment for a lot of people that need employment here in Nanaimo. That's what we have to also take a look at. How you build it, that's another story. That's something that you guys have to figure out. You're in the positions that we voted you in, and you got to find a way to make this work somehow. But you can't turn a blind eye on it, because you can't be the only one of those cities that doesn't have an event center. You need to have something here in the city because we need to keep people working. And you will keep a lot of people working because of it. That's the big difference. It's not just about, if we want more walking trails or more hiking trails and everything else. That will come because when you have more people working, you have more taxes coming in, you have more people paying into the tax base, there will be more funds for other things to do. It's not just a one-stop shop, they build it and that's it. It isn't. You're keeping people employed here in Nanaimo. You're keeping the young people hopefully here in Nanaimo. Not just to work as busboys or housemaids, but as managers of hotels. You have 24 hotels here that look to you guys to find ways how to help us fill these rooms. This is just another opportunity for us to help fill our guest rooms when we really need it. We know we have it in the summer, but this is an important time for us to take a good look what happens at these months. Some people say it's a Western Hockey League. Forget it. It's just hockey. You may think it's hockey. We think it's customers and people that are coming to Nanaimo. And it's not just 40 games. There's playoff games, and there's other tournaments. There's minor peewee hockey tournaments. Just other things that happen in there. There's indoor soccer. There's lacrosse tournaments. You can keep going on and on and on. And they will come here when we have the right facilities. And that's what's good about having an event center. It keeps us employed. It keeps me employed. It keeps our housekeepers employed. We all work our 40 hours and we get it. But our housekeepers and everything else will only work when there's people in our hotel. They're the first ones that are laid off, the first ones that are waiting, that really need the jobs to make it work. The event center does that for us. It helps us fill up those shoulder seasons that we need filled. And that's what's important to look at. And we know it's going to be hard to figure this out, but that's why you're in positions you're in. You want to be voted into this. You want to talk about this. Good for you guys to have the courage to even bring this up to try to talk about, because it is big. You brought the big shooters in town to talk about it. You brought the right people in here, and they gave you good information that you got to listen to. But also make sure that you remind yourselves that you're putting people to work here in Nanaimo. Those young people that need the jobs, you're helping them get the jobs because more people will be working when you do have the event center. That's what's important for us. So as an employer here in town that hires approximately 125 people, and that's just one hotel, think about those employees. They need your help. We know it could help us out with this event center. That's what's good about it also. And that's what I just wanted to bring up for today. We talked about everything else here today, so I'm going to talk about creating jobs for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I see no questions.
I know.
Thank you. Motion to receive the delegation. Councillor Thorpe and Councillor Pratt. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one, Mr. Don Bonner, followed by Mr. Gary Wakeham.
Thank you, Council, for allowing me to be a late delegation. I was interested in the report by CBD Plus. He mentioned that you had 2,750 points of contact. And, of course, there would be duplications. If we took off 10% for duplications, that number would be around 2,450, which just happens to be the membership of the Facebook group of Better Nanaimo, of which I'm one of the admins. And we've been discussing this for approximately 4 weeks about the event center, the multiplex, and whatever else we wish to call it at the time. And we've basically come to the same conclusions they did, in that a number of people are opposed to it. A number of people don't want it with public funding or only partial funding. And a lot of them want a referendum. And that's what I'm here to speak to tonight. I don't believe that council has permission to build this event center until they have permission from the majority of the citizens of Nanaimo. And I would encourage them to go to a referendum sooner than later. Because what council needs to do is stop spending money on this event center until you actually do have the permission to build it. Because we're spending an awful lot of money. We've already spent $250,000 and generating good reports by all these gentlemen here, of which I'm not complaining. It's just that if you don't get permission through a referendum, this is money wasted. We won't be able to use it for anything else because we won't be building an event center. So please get the permission, go to a referendum sooner than later. And I would recommend, in addition to that, that if council wants to, when they get the report later tonight, there's going to be omnibus recommendations of 11 to council. I suggest they skip right down to number 11, pass that one, and move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions. Oh, Councillor Fuller.
How many people are in your Facebook group?
2,457 or thereabouts.
And how many actually asked to join that group? I know at the beginning it started with over 1,000 members that were all added right at the beginning, and no one was asked. I know that because I was one of those members. So I'm just curious, how many actually asked to join that group? And one other question, because I follow these things, and I have my own group, so I do follow these things. There are more people in the auditorium tonight than are commenting on this on your, mine, and 2 other groups put together that I know of. So I get the referendum thing. I support a referendum wholeheartedly. But to say you're representing 2,500 people, I think, is a bit of a misnomer.
Well, I tend to disagree with you on that. I'm not here to discuss it better than Nanaimo. I was just pointing out that the conversations we're having on this Facebook group are similar to some of the reports you're getting back from your agencies. And if council was paying attention, they could have got that information for $0. Wouldn't cost you a penny. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Motion to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Pratt. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And Mr. Gary Wycombe.
Thank you. A lot of information was released on Friday afternoon. I was fortunate enough to have most of the weekend for myself, and I went through a lot of this stuff. So I can probably talk for about 2 hours, but I've got a ferry to catch at 10 after 10 or I don't get home tonight. So I'll stick to the 5 minutes. What I am going to do is actually start with my recommendations. And if there's any time left over, I can maybe give a bit more explanation of how I got there. I don't have a position on the event center yet because I don't think I don't have enough information to make a decision myself. I think the people you've hired have done a tremendous amount of work in a short period of time. I can't believe, actually how much has gotten done. I've been involved in this business myself. I know what it takes to mobilize staff on such short notice. So I think you're on the right track here, what I would say. So I have 7 recommendations that I think you should add to your resolution where you've already got 11 recommendations. The first one is to do what I would call a community assessment of the costs and benefits of this project. Right now we've gotten a lot of information on the benefits, but we haven't got very much information on what the potential costs could be. And if we do a community assessment, look at it broadly in terms of social development, economic development, how this might affect the environment, as you would a sustainability plan, I think we would be in a better position to determine whether this, in fact, is going to go ahead. Just to give you an example, the MNP study talks about the economic impact of the new construction input-output model. If we're using money that is already in the community, i.e. 100% paid for by our tax base, this is not new money coming into the community. It is money that would have already got spent, either by council or it would have been left in the hands of the taxpayers, and they would have spent it. If we get money from the federal government, that's new money, or a private sector person comes in, that's new money. Then, in fact, the MNMP numbers start to make sense. But if it's 100% public money from Nanaimo, we're not going to get those economic benefits. We might have it. There's an impact, but it's just a reallocation of money that is already in our community. Along the same lines, we have a junior hockey team in here, the Clippers. I've never been to the game. They did a great job analyzing the impact of bringing in a WHL team. But if they come in, do the Clippers leave? Coaches, trainers, bus drivers, players, other teams. So how does that get deducted out of that impact? That'll give you what your benefit is. So there needs to be, I think, a bit more study that way. So I would suggest that you do it. The other one that goes along with this one is I've looked through those reports, read them very clearly, and tried to say, where's the new information here that tells us really about what's going to happen as a result of building this center and the trade area, how it's going to respond to it. And, you know, the best that I could find was we have information from the Port Theatre that says 20% of their tickets are outside of Nanaimo, 10% are off the island. And if we're going to plan an event center based around those numbers, are those the same people going to the Port Theatre that are going to go to the monster trucks and the rodeos? Can we apply that information and say that's correct? In a previous presentation, Mr. Green suggested we might actually go from that 30% to 35%. Well, that's somebody's opinion. I don't see some real rigor that is being put to that information. The Myers-Norris Penny, talking about accommodations. That's a great revenue generator for the community, but it's based on Kelowna experience. That's been when I read the report. So I look at this and go, gee, some of this market stuff, to me, I think is built on a house of cards. So that's where I wonder, let's go back, review some of the information with a community assessment. Make sure sober second thought is being done properly. My second recommendation, delay the detailed design. The proposed phasing program referred to it that in phase 3 a detailed design was going to be done. According to the information that was put out on Friday, there's been $495,000 spent to date. I think you've got good value for your money. But if you go to detailed design, I mean, they'll know the answer better than me. We could be looking anywhere from $500,000 to $3 million. I mean, if they're just doing functional schematics, it's a lot less. But if it's full detailed design, golly, that's a huge amount of money to be spending here without perhaps having all the information that we need. A financial advisor. I don't know what the terms of reference are going to be for the financial advisor that's being suggested, but I would suggest go have the financial advisor, go have him talk to the adjacent municipalities. Don't make this a City of Nanaimo project. Make it a regional project. You've got a letter from the Ladysmith School District. Bring in Ladysmith, bring in Parksville, Lanceville, the regional district. Perhaps you can get them to help fund part of this. So it isn't all on the backs of the City of Nanaimo taxpayers. I
have to get you to wrap up, sir.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. How much time do I have?
You're out of time.
Okay.
I was actually going to take a minute from your previous
Can I say
overtime.
one more? One more. Just
One point.
more. Thank you.
So you're at
I see nowhere in the recommendations where you're actually doing a risk assessment. I know it says that the words intentional risk management, but put it right in there as one of the 11 recommendations. Hire a risk manager, a third party who's independent of council, staff, and consultants to look back at the big picture and say, right, is everyone looking at this with an open mind? That's all. Thank you for the extra time.
Councillor Thorpe has a question for you.
Yes, comment actually, if I may, Chair. Thank you through you to the delegation. I just wanted to point out that I voted against allowing you to speak a second time, and that was only because I didn't like the precedent that was being set. But I do appreciate your comments, as I appreciate the comments of all that have taken the time to come tonight and speak. I think people have made some excellent points, both for and against. I'll be speaking more on my views on this proposal a little bit later, but I just want to acknowledge you and the others that have spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Fuller.
You mentioned adding a risk assessment.
Yes.
Well, I look at the next thing in the 11 things there, and there's a lot that isn't mentioned in there, risk assessment. What's also not mentioned in there, and this has been brought up once before, or twice during the meeting, and also I see it mentioned from the public, is consultation with the Snuneymuxw people and First Nations. And that is something that we will be doing. We will be having further consultation with the Snuneymuxw. Their original village sites were at both of these locations. So it behooves us as a city to consult with them. So it's not in here,
Yeah.
but we will be doing that.
Yeah.
Archaeological assessments will have to be done. So there's a lot of work, including these 11 items to do, and I would hazard to guess a risk assessment as part of that.
Yeah,
as,
I think
as well
that's-
as the other aspects.
I have to agree. I think that's really important because when I read the reports, it always seemed to be best case scenario to a large degree. And, you know, if you look at like the Lethbridge Hurricanes, they're in a facility for 5,000 attendees. They went on a 6-year losing streak. Their attendance plummeted to 3,000 a game. But they were counting their attendance by tickets sold. But many of the season ticket holders weren't showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So you were actually only getting 1,400 or 1,500 to a game at the bottom of the trough. That had a huge impact then on concessions and beverage sales.
Yeah.
So I think you have to do 2 scenarios as part of this risk assessment. Best case, and you know, not worst case, but golly, something that's reasonable.
And then we could look at the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Thank you, sir. No more questions. Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Thorpe, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Pardon me? Yeah. So before we get into discussion on the recommendations, we're going to take that break that was scheduled for 9 o'clock. That'll give everybody an opportunity to stand up and stretch their weary bones. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are back in session. Council, take your seats. Members of the gallery, take your seats, please. So the next item of business that we need to deal with is that we have one item that we have to return in camera. The recommendation from the CAO is that we go in camera at 10:30 and deal with that issue and then come back out. What is council's pleasure? Councilor Beswick.
Well, we knew coming into open, out of closed, that that it was recessed and that we were going to have to go back into closed. So I'm impartial whether we go in camera now and finish that session off and then come back out here, or if we stay out here and do what we need to do here, but we need to ensure that we go back in camera before the witching hour of 11, because we may not choose to go back in camera, which we have to. So
Camera committing to go back in at 8:30 to resume that topic matter.
thank you. So when we left in camera, we made and recessed. We said we were going to go back in at 8:30 because the break was supposed to be at 9. And we did say we'd go back in at 8:30. And we didn't do that because we allowed all the delegations, which is fine, to speak. So we can, as far as I'm concerned, I'm willing and ready to go back in right now
Let's do it.
and get that off our docket and then come back out here.
Okay, is that a motion?
Sure.
Okay, is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kipp.
Bearing in mind you already have a motion on the books that you recessed till 8:30 and that you committed to going back in there. So I'm not really sure you need another vote.
We broke to go have a break.
I don't recall. Can you help us here, Ms. Curry? Was there a motion that was approved by council to go back in at 8:30?
It was unanimous consent that you agreed to go back in at 8:30.
Okay.
Can we
and then
please
we
do that now?
postponed
But
that,
nobody can
so
remember that.
you could go back in without a vote right now,
Okay.
if that was your pleasure.
Can we do it? Let's do it.
Ms. Samra?
recommend that we do that now
Okay.
rather than at 11 o'clock.
We will be back.
We need legal counsel.
Suite of recommendations. There are 11 recommendations under the staff recommendation on page 9.
Your Worship?
So, yeah.
Your Worship, I think that you might have missed the first report. The Event Center Development Principles. It's on page 6 to 8 of the addendum.
Pardon me. So the first one is the Event Center 7A Development Principles. And Ms. Fowler has a presentation.
Your Worship and Councillors, this is essentially principles to guide the design, financing, construction, and the contemplated event center expressed through the recent community engagement. So we use that process to develop these. The City of Nanaimo has undertaken a multi-channel public engagement process on the event center in November and December of this year. Feedback was secured through public engagements to provide a set of expectations about public interests, sense of community, fiscal prudence, and impact on existing facilities and the downtown Nanaimo area. The development and operating principles will be used to inform the design, construction, financing, and operation of the planned event center. And essentially, you have those 4 principles in the recommendation. So staff are recommending that Council adopt the following 4 guiding principles for the development and operations of the contemplated event center. Number 1, ensure the interests of the residents of the City of Nanaimo are protected. Number 2, the event center is a community meeting place catering for all and promoting community wellness. Number 3, funding for the development and operations of the event center come from a mix of public, private, and other sources. Number 4, the event center is complementary to existing facilities and a catalyst for downtown revitalization. And this is essentially required to get and acquire the further information as the city proposes to continue its due diligence, which was one of the key aspects in the public consultation, was getting more information. Your Worship.
Thank you very much. So is there a mover for the motion? Moved by Councillor Hong, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. Discussion. Councillor Brennan.
Number 3 says, funding for development and operations of the event center come from a mix of public, private, and other sources. Can you explain where we would be looking for the private investment?
Your Worship, essentially there is naming rights, there's facility rentals, there's those facility rights. Those are the aspects in terms of the private investment that will be is the normal process that goes through for these event centers.
So, excuse me, that would just to confirm, it would be the sales of T-shirts and stuff inside the buildings. It would be some sponsorship, naming rights of rooms and the center itself.
Yes, Your Worship, through to Councillor Brendan, these are the lease of the restaurants and the facilities. Yes, the lease to the ones that sell the T-shirts. Also, though, most municipalities do now consider naming rights. So you have Save On Foods Memorial Centre in Victoria, and they actually, Save On Foods paid the city through a naming rights process for the ability to use that.
Yeah,
Your Worship.
we've been exploring that for other things in our community too. But it doesn't actually contemplate going out and finding a private investor.
Yes, it does.
Does it?
Phase 3 is to explore all of the financing options, and I think there was 22 or 30 different ways of funding it, so there's nothing that precludes the city from continuing to work with potential investors and looking at P3 for the event center. Of course, that's going to be contingent on also in this next phase getting closer for council to make a site selection. And of course, before you can do that, there has to be further consultation with Snuneymuxw First Nation. The city has met over the last 6 months with Snuneymuxw First Nation. We have shared drafts of Phase 1 report, Phase 2 report, and potential site locations for the event center on both the Howard Johnson and the One Port Drive. So it's going to be a continuing of that consultation with them to a deeper level of engagement and looking at once council decides, and actually part of your decision of what to choose for one of the sites will be based on the feedback and work with Snuneymuxw First Nation.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. I support the staff recommendations, but to follow up somewhat on what Councillor Brennan was saying, I find number 1 and number 2 and number 4 sort of motherhood statements, and I have no problem with them, of course. But number 3, I think, is important as we move ahead in this. What I've been hearing tonight is a willingness of the community to support this project, but they need more information, specifically where is this going to be built, how much is it going to cost, and how is it going to be funded. And to me, number 3 suggests that it's going to be a combination of public and private funding, and there I hope, will be some private funding involved. But the reality is, and people are welcome to correct me if I'm misspeaking, the reality seems to be that the vast majority of the funding for this project will in fact come from taxpayers' dollars. So I don't want this statement to be misleading to people as we move forward, and I want that well understood as we move towards more public consultation and ultimately a referendum. So I don't know that I like the wording on number 3. I just find it a little bit, as I say, I'm not criticizing staff, but to me it's possibly a little misleading. Maybe that's the wrong word. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the staff's recommendation, all 4. And just for me, to Councillor Thorpe, you indicated where it's going to be built, what's it going to cost, and who's going to fund it. And so we know that if it does proceed to referendum and it is approved, hypothetically if it's approved, then it's going to be built on one of 2 sites that have been identified so far, but the site will be identified in the 3rd phase of which site it is. So we know it's one of 2 places. The cost, well, we've been told by our people that it's depending on if you go to the base model or the base plus A or the base plus A and B or the base plus B, it's $60 to $80 million plus or minus. And funding, it indicates right in here in number 3, development and operations. So I suspect that would come from the public. I suspect that would come from retail operations, square foot leases in the venue, because there will be some. There will be restaurant leases. There will be some for operations. There may or may not be parking revenues generated. I read in the report that it says that there won't be, but that doesn't mean that there necessarily won't be. So I'm comfortable with this because I think that we know from all of the information that we have that there's some moving parts to this. So it's almost impossible to get the exact dynamics of the specifics without getting into the 3rd phase of this evolution. So I'll be supporting all 4.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. I too think that 3 is misleading, and I think that's just because they've included operations there, and that's because naming rights, well, maybe naming rights pays for a bit of the building, but restaurants, any other stuff that's like that is strictly around the operations once it's built. So I think people will find this one misleading. I really hope we can find a private developer, but from what all I've heard from everybody, that doesn't sound like that's going to happen. So I don't see it happening unless some miracle happens. So I do find it misleading. I'd like it changed. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Fuller.
I like number 3. Funding for development and operations of the center come from a mix of public, private, and other sources. It indicates we're looking at everything here. We're not going to rule out anything. Hey, if the province of Alberta wants to help us fund this sucker, we'll take it. That would be another source. So if we start to limit and put conditions on how much, where the funding is going to come from, then we make it too tight. This is nice and loose. I like it that way. That means the funding can come from anywhere for development and operations. And I'll tell you what, if I win the $55 million lottery, I'll throw in $5 million myself.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the recommendations. It's a little bit confusing with respect to the development and operations of the event center coming from public and private sources, and considering sponsorship and the like to be private funding. I don't buy into that one. I think most people in town would believe that private funding means that somebody's either going to give us some money, not another level of government, that would be under the other sources, but the private money would be that somebody's going to invest in the building and may well have a share in the ownership of the building. It doesn't mean sponsoring naming rights, in my mind, and I don't know if it does the community itself. The rental of restaurant spaces and those sorts of things also don't mean, in my mind, they don't mean that's public funding or private funding. If they were part of a strata, if we strated this building and these things were sold, then that'd be something different. Okay, so but I will be supporting it. Councillor Brennan.
I just I want to say that I'm not in support of this project. However, I know that if we go to the next phase, that for me to feel like I've done my due diligence, then I will say that these 4 principles are necessary for us to make the best of what I would consider not a good project. But if that happens, then we need to have these kinds of principles in place, and so that's why I support them. But but number 3 is clearly misleading. I think it leads people to believe that there will be private investors. But having said that, if it's going to go anywhere, those 4 principles have to be in place.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. I'll just say I'm in favor of all 4. And I don't know what the amounts might end up being, but as an example, the 2% MRDT hotel tax right now generates about $525,000, $475,000 plus or minus a year. And should this proceed, and should there be another hotel built as a result of an event center being built, which is common, then I can suspect that the amount of money that's generated in the 2% hotel tax would probably increase by about 25% upon completion of a hotel, which their MRDT collects private monies, and they put that money back into the community. So until such time as we know if we're going to proceed with, this is just one example, where we could go to the hotel association, or whatever they're called, and say, we would like you to provide X dollars from the hotel tax that you collect as a result of the increased numbers of events that take place here. We might be able to go to the casino, and the Great Canadian Casino, and structure and negotiate something more than we have today. We might be able to. But until such time as we know if we're going to proceed with the project or not, then we can't say, well, there is or there isn't any private contributors out there. and then whatever the deal is that you can strike with a private contributor, so it's in their greatest interest. And somebody may have a desire to make a significant donation for tax benefits or whatever the case might be. So until such time as we know if we're going to proceed down this path, which we need to make that decision, and then allow the community to decide on a referendum, then, probably and only then, can we start really being actively engaged in trying to secure and negotiate with people for private funding and see where that takes us. But right now, I think it's premature to suggest that there won't be any. There might not be any, but it won't be for a lack of trying, and it won't be for a lack of opportunity to try. But until such time as we have that opportunity, this is really rhetoric, to be quite honest.
Thank you. Councillor Fuller.
Throwing more rhetoric in here. It was just mentioned that selling the retail space, I think that was the biggest mistake we ever made with this joint. We sold the retail space for less than cost, and most of it sits empty today. So if there's any discussion of selling the retail space in that building, I'm out. You know, let's lease it. Let's get the most we can out of this. And over the years, it brings in money, and it is private money that's coming in and helping to support the operations of the facility. So, to me, I'll support it.
Thank you. Ms. Sammer.
Thank you, Mayor McKay. So, 3 councillors have identified that the drafting of principle number 3 may be misleading, but Councillor Pratt quite rightly pointed out that the development or construction of the facility is one aspect, and the second is the operations of the facilities. And Council has reviewed the 10-year business plan, and as part of the business plan, it identifies private money from leasing and from other sales in the operations that takes the operations from modest subsidies for year 1 and 2 and puts it into substantial profits going from year 3 out to year 10. So that's an example of private funding contributing to the operations of the event center. In terms of the construction, part of what staff will be working at is looking at, are there any investors that are going to invest or wish to buy a share in the event center? And depending on what site that is, there may or may not be investors available. Who knows? Perhaps other organizations do want to buy a share of it and invest in it. So we're suggesting that a principle that we've heard from the community is that you not close down that opportunity and assume that it has to be 100% city funded. Certainly it's going to be a challenge, but we're going to try to go out there and see what we can do. And also, quite rightly, other sources for building and funding the construction or debt servicing of the construction can come from other sources, such as increasing the hotel tax from 2 to 3%. The city is a 50% partner in that deal, so should the city want to increase that hotel tax from 2 to 3% with the agreement of the NHA, you could take that 1% and apply that to the debt servicing of the construction of the event center. So there are a lot of opportunities that are still there. The point of this principle is to say we're going to explore them in both the construction and the operations of an event center. And hopefully that clarification in this meeting, in our media releases afterwards, will make sure that nobody thinks something they ought not to be thinking.
Thank you. Councillor Yoakum.
Oh, thank you. Just quickly, with all these funding options, these funding conversations we're having right now, Ms. Sammer, I believe these are all these ideas to come forward in the next phase or stage. So I look forward to those options. Otherwise, we could sit here and think of every what if till tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is Event Center Next Steps. There are 11 recommendations. Does someone want to move them as a block?
I'll move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hong. Discussion.
At least I would like 11 pulled out and done first, and then do the others. It's just what I want to do. Probably doesn't matter to anybody else how it's ordered, but for me, supporting the referendum is essential.
Okay.
You're going to second that?
Well, there's already a motion. I was a seconder. I agreed to the amendment to move it to the front.
Move it to the front?
Number 11 to the top is what Councillor Brennan said.
Council,
Do it on
Council
its
okay with
own,
that?
and do it on its own.
Going to do number 11 first. Sarah Adam. The rest of them we'll do together as a block. Okay. So, call the question on number 11. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So now the next one, 1 through 10.
Second.
You don't have to move it again.
It's already been moved.
Yeah, it's already been moved and seconded, so you just voted on number 11 alone. You can vote on the block now together.
Councillor Hong? No?
Brennan.
Okay. Councillor Brennan?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to support the rest, the balance of them. I'm not going to support hiring, securing the services of a legal advisor, of a financial advisor, of a project manager, of a professional event center management firm, of a professional architect firm until I know the results of the referendum. Because it's obviously a lot of money to do those hirings and securings, and I just can't see the point in doing that, spending that kind of money if the outcome is ultimately going to be not to proceed.
Thank you. Councillor Hong?
Thank you. I will support them all because, contrary to what Councillor Brennan said, I don't think it would make sense to go to referendum without doing this other stuff. Because if we don't get a WHL team, I'm not interested in building this. We need an anchor tenant. So, number 2 directs council staff to enter into negotiations with WHL team. So, unless we get that, I don't think doing a referendum is there's no point to it. So I support all 10. We need them all these all together. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick?
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Hong, but 2, 3, 4 are something that we have to continue to work on. 5 to 10 are things that I suspect is over the course of the 90 days between, or however long it is between now and a referendum, would be putting out expressions of interest. I don't know that anybody's going to be hired, but it would certainly start the process over the course of the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks to get expressions of interest out there for interested parties that may wish to be engaged as a legal consultant or a construction or whatever the case might be, so that in the event that the event center does proceed, that we're not losing extremely valuable time that we will need to be able to meet timelines. So I think it's prudent, not that we select and hire somebody and put them on payroll between now and the referendum, but certainly that we entertain the procedures and processes that are going to be necessary to put out advertisements and calls for expressions of interest, so that those can be vetted, so that when the time comes and we're in a position to move, and not in a position that, okay, now we can start to move, and it doesn't cost us anything until we actually put them to work anyway. So I think we have to meet some timelines. And if we don't, then we just put ourselves further behind, which could cost us at the end of the day if the project is approved. And the community is going to tell us if they approve it or not. So, because we've already agreed to go to a referendum. So I don't see the downside of doing it. I see the downside of not doing it, because we'll lose many, many weeks of the cycle to start the process if we don't know.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I get sticker shock every time I look at some of the research required on this project. But you know what makes absolute perfect sense? You know, it's impossible to go out to the community and say, hey, do you want to build an event center? We think it might be 80, might be 90, whatever. Well, no, the public wants answers to these questions. And I originally thought, you know, we might at the end of the day have to spend $500,000 to get the answers to the questions. But this is a $90 million project, thereabouts, plus or minus, and could be more, depending upon which choice we go with. When the public says, where are you going to build it? Well, we need to do that research. How much is it going to cost? We need to do that research. We need to do designs because you can't go to construction companies, major builders, with no design. How much is it going to cost for this building? You got to have detailed drawings for them. And you know, I would say at the end of the day, on this potentially $90 million plus project, we're going to spend $1 million to answer every last question that the public's got. How much is the WHL team going to pay us? What are we going to earn in revenue? How are we going to fund it? There's 100 or more questions that need to be answered, and we've got to do this research to get the answers to those questions. And I really believe that every single one of them are legitimate questions in order to be able to go out when it does come to the ballot time. I'm first one to say, I want the community to make this decision, not us. So we've got to do our homework, and we've got to get all the answers for them so they can make that decision. All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Councillor Brennan is opposed. Motion passes. So we're at the hour of 11 o'clock. We've completed that item. Is council's wish to continue beyond the hour of 11 o'clock? Is there a motion?
We've gone since 10 o'clock this morning. I'm not interested in taking a motion. What do we have to decide?
We have a number of delegations with respect to a notice of motion, and we have a delegation concerning core services report.
You may wish to do is moving the recommendations to refer the safe injection site proposal to the social committee.
I'll move
The
that.
public safety.
Okay, I won't move it.
It's a different committee.
Well, I can't remember the name. Which one is it? Public safety. If you move and do that, then
Having said that it's beyond the hour of 11, there's been no motion to go beyond 11. We finished that last item.
I was speaking just before 11 o'clock, so maybe I caught it in there. It's just an easy motion.
Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to go beyond 11. Is there, Councillor Yocum, you've got to...
Yes, I just have to regretfully remove myself. I have to deal with a matter, personal matter.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor going beyond 11? Councillor Brennan? Councillor Kipp? Motion fails.
Okay, did my
Meeting
duty.
adjourned.